all set. Should be good.
I'll stop texting you after 5.
What does it say on your computer? 9 o'clock?
Yep, she just wanted to, she's starting.
Okay. You ready to go? It's going to be later. Or,
Kelly will be a little bit late. He will be joining us later.
okay. And we'll call the meeting to order. It's 9 o'clock by my wristwatch. And you have a motion to adopt the agenda.
So at committee, we don't usually assign the movers, but I think the movers and seconders here will be Councillor Higgs and Councillor Martin.
Was there any late additions to the
No,
agenda?
there are no additions to the agenda.
Okay, got a call motion, all in favor of the motion to adopt the agenda. Are there any disclosure of pecuniary interest by any member of the committee in regard to the agenda presented today? Minutes indicate no disclosure. And I have a motion to adopt the minutes.
Again, that will be Councillor Martin and Councillor
Okay.
Higgs.
Was there any discussion on the minutes by anybody? Okay. And I assume the minutes be adopted. All in favor? Minutes are carried. No deputation or presentations today. Okay. So the items for consideration strike the agenda is manager of legislative services clerk. Can you update us on that?
Thank you, Councillor McDonald. So again, the committee was looking at going through sections 1 to 10 for this meeting. I did stop at section 9 simply because section 9 deals with the electronic meeting procedures, which I believe is going to take probably a good portion of the day. So that might be better left until the next meeting. So you have in front of you, or was attached to the agenda, the chart that I had made in terms of recommendations by staff that would need to be updated in the bylaw. So I can just go through the first one, and the first one is perhaps a little bit easy, but our bylaw has never actually included a short title. And a short title is simply a smaller title of what the bylaw actually is. So most statutes, as you see, have quite lengthy titles. So they're normally given a short title. So the actual full title of this bylaw under the Municipal Act is a bylaw to govern the proceedings of the council and its committees, the conduct of members, and the calling of meetings. So we've never, ever referred to it as that. We've always referred to it as the procedural bylaw. So I just thought that that might be perhaps an appropriate inclusion into the bylaw as the first piece, that we are going to put a citation in there that this is referred to in a short title as the procedural bylaw.
Okay. Either member, go ahead, Bruce.
Well, yeah, I agree to that we should shorten that to procedural bylaw. Is that what you want?
So I'm suggesting the procedural bylaw, unless there's other suggestions. I'm not sure what else we could really shorten it to, because that specifically is what it is a procedural bylaw.
Do either members have any different opinion in regard to this suggestion?
No, it's common sense.
Yeah. Bruce? Okay, and so why don't we just have a show of hands if you concur with it, and then we'll move on. Okay.
Let's pull that through.
Yeah. Okay.
So the next section of the bylaw is interpretation. Staff had no comments on sections 1.1 or 1.2. We didn't see any need to change this. The next one is under definitions. So just going through, and there are a number of definitions that perhaps are missing. So I've noted some there where there's definitions that would need to be added. So we're suggesting that the definition of act be added to specifically refer to the Municipal Act. And the reason that we have suggested this is because the procedural bylaw actually outlines a number of different acts as well. It outlines the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act in terms of pecuniary interest. Sometimes it actually refers to your code of conduct. So we just want to make sure to shorten act that we are specifically talking about the Municipal Act, because the Municipal Act is the key piece of legislation that governs the bylaw. So that was one definition that we suggested to be added.
Now, just in recommendations, where are you going to put that definition? Right at the beginning of the section?
Yes, Councillor McDonald. So the definitions are typically put in alphabetical order. So once we get through the whole process and we have all the definitions added that we may have wanted, or we've added new sections that we may have wanted to, or deleted sections, the very last piece will be to put everything in order.
Right.
So the definitions will go in alphabetical order. The sections will be renumbered to ensure that they're in numerical order.
Right. Okay. Members agree with that? Agree. Yep. Okay.
So the second definition that we've suggested here is addendum. So currently the agenda, or sorry, the definitions include the agenda, but we no longer confirm the agenda for a few reasons with it. And again, this report was brought to council a few years ago. The agenda isn't actually confirmed because the agenda is set out in the procedural bylaw on how it's listed. What is confirmed at each meeting is an addendum, because the procedural bylaw specifically states when things are to be added to the agenda and when the agenda goes out, and when things are to be in the hands of the clerk for when the agenda goes out. So the agenda does go out on Friday. So anything that's added to the agenda after that is what we call an addendum. And because it's in contradiction of the procedural bylaw to not have it ready when the agenda is published, it actually requires a 2/3 vote. But that is the definition of addendum that we're considering having.
Okay.
That's under 1.3. I don't see it.
What's the jury?
Oh, excuse me, I'm looking at 1.3 definitions, I don't see. Addendum in 1.3 definition.
Sorry, no, we're suggesting to add it.
Add.
Add the definition of addendum. So the addendum is simply a listing of items to be added or withdrawn from a published agenda.
I understand what it is, I just did, I thought, but I couldn't believe it's not here because we've been using that for the last 10 years.
Perhaps an oversight of staff. I've just noticed it myself as I went through these definitions one by one, and I was thinking about what we do during the meeting. It just popped in that it's not there.
So do we have to vote on each one?
Sorry, so I just want to make sure that if we're in agreement. I don't think it requires a vote, but just to know that we're in agreement that.
I've been asking, do you agree with that addition?
If we don't agree, we'll make it known.
Perhaps that's, but we have to
Agreed.
use that.
So the next definition that we're suggesting to add is abstain. So many members of council may choose to abstain from a vote because they don't want to vote one way or another. But the Municipal Act is very clear that when you abstain from a vote, it is a no vote. So just so that councillors are aware of this, because I'm not sure if many of them are, we're suggesting to add into the definitions that abstain means that you are refraining from voting, but members who abstain for reasons other than a declared conflict of interest, which is dealt with differently, shall be deemed to vote in opposition of the question or matter. So it just makes it very clear for council that even though you don't want to make your choice known, an abstaining vote is a no vote.
Can I have a comment?
Sure.
At our local council and municipal council, we've always considered a negative vote. Is that some, like, We just did our procedural bylaws. I don't remember even discussing that. I'm not sure it's in our local procedural bylaws.
It is an hour.
It must be, because I know we've always considered that as a negative vote. My thing is, I thought that we would just follow along tier, the upper tier, lower tier, be all the same. I didn't realize it was different.
Sorry, it may not be different. I mean, even with an abstained vote in the past, if a councillor had abstained, I've always looked at it as a no vote because the municipal act is very clear that an abstention is a no vote. I just wanted to perhaps add this into the procedural bylaws so that any councillors coming on board are quite aware that, you know, if the question comes that, you know, I chose not to vote no on that or yes on that, that they are quite aware that an abstention is a no vote.
Well, if there's a conflict of interest, if there's a conflict of interest and you can't vote, I mean, is it still a no vote?
No, so as you can see in the definition here, it means refrain from voting. Members who abstain for reasons other than a
Oh.
declared conflict of interest
Okay.
shall be deemed to be a no vote.
Okay.
What it really means is you can't sit on the fence.
And I see it happen. Locally, I see it happen.
And you can't sit on the fence, you're just gonna fall off on the wrong side.
Yeah, that's right.
Fall off on the wrong side.
But let's face it, you came here to make a decision one way or the other,
Mhm.
right? And you need a majority vote on most issues in which to move forward or to pass them or they fail. So abstaining from voting doesn't solve anything. So it has to be considered a negative vote. All right, anybody, members agree with that addition? Okay.
So, my apologies. So the next three are sort of in conjunction with each other. So currently, right now, in our procedural bylaw, we define the term committee. And basically, committee is defined as, if I can find it here, any standing committee, subcommittee, advisory committee, or task force established by council. So the next three really clearly define your different types of committees. So what we're suggesting are three different types of committees that can be defined. It doesn't change the committee structure as it stands right now. It just clearly defines these committees. So the first one is an advisory committee. So this is clearly defined as a committee that's established by council to act in an advisory capacity to council on operational and strategic issues during the full term of council. So that is your advisory committees, and examples of those are your accessibility advisory committee, the planning advisory committee would be one, the community development advisory committee would be one. They have a specific mandate to advise council. And then the next one is an ad hoc committee. So an ad hoc committee really is a committee that's just appointed from time to time to look at one specific issue. So examples of that would have been an ad hoc committee. Maybe, for example, what council has just appointed Mr. Wayne Robinson to do in terms of looking at user fees on the trail. That would have been an ideal opportunity for council to establish an ad hoc committee to look at that one specific issue. And then it also allows you to have that one specific councillor to say, I'd like to look at that, and you can put a committee around that. Another example may have been the seniors housing task force. They were only tasked to look at one item, and that's to get a business plan to council. So they're not ongoing committees. They're a committee that's assigned for one specific task. And once that task is completed, it can then be disbanded. And then on top, the last one there that we have is a standing committee. So a standing committee, in my eyes, is a committee that just consists of members of council. So this, for example, would be the CAO Performance Appraisal Review Committee. It just includes members of council. And so the reason I was kind of looking at this is because then we have an issue of closed session. And do we want committees to be able to go into closed session when they have citizen appointees on them? Keeping in mind that when you're going into closed session, citizen appointees are not accountable to the public and they're not accountable really to council. I mean, you can ask them, you can remove them, but there's really no mechanism for if they're dealing with sensitive information that's in closed session. Do we want members of the public to have that? Because even though they're appointed to a committee, they still are a member of the public. And closed session material is very sensitive and very confidential. So the thought would be if these committees are approved to only ensure that only standing committees are able to go into closed session, because the standing committees only have members of council on them. I can't imagine an advisory committee needing to go into closed session. There was perhaps one issue in the past when they were dealing with RFPs, because when we were doing interviews for RFPs, they were done in closed session. But again, when you're dealing with an RFP and it's an RFP that has a large monetary value added to it, who should be making those decisions? Do you want it going into closed session in a capacity of an advisory committee where you have, perhaps 50% or more members of the public making those decisions on council's behalf, or should it be at the council level? So that was one of the criteria that we had put around these different committees. So we're suggesting that we add specific definition around those three types of committees, and that we only allow a standing committee to go into closed session.
Comments? Someone?
Yeah, I agree with that. I know that quite often you get drawn into a conversation about personal conversations as well as mine. Maybe the general public shouldn't be aware of some of those conversations. I just don't think it's right. So I agree with you what you're saying.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, I just want to get an advisory committee in just in the very verbiage of the words are simply to offer advice. Right? They don't, in the final analysis, make decisions that council has to adhere to. So I'm wondering if that word advisory capacity only, maybe the word only should be added in there.
Well, even no committee has, it's ultimately council's decision. So council holds the final decision. So even with an ad hoc committee and a standing committee, or even committee of the whole, which is all of council, holds no authority. The final decision rests with council as a whole when they come together and sit as a whole. So even if decisions are made in an ad hoc committee, it still needs to go, their recommendations would still need to go to council.
Right. So basically, that's where I'm coming from. And that's why the word advisory is so important, because you're advising the committee of the whole. You're not actually making decisions. You're basically collecting the information to allow county council to make a final decision. So I have no problem with that at all. The ad hoc committee, because it's an issue that came along and you need to research some information and once again, come to a recommendation to council, but it's got a life. Am I correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if it should say something about what you are saying, that further recommendations are no longer required. So it's a time thing there. And the standing committee, I have no problem with that. So, to me, all three should be included somewhere.
And again, some of these items can be a little bit more tied up when we get to section 20.
Right.
21, which deals specifically with committees.
Yes.
I believe it's, sorry, section 27. So section 27 deals specifically with committees. So at that point, we can also put additional criteria around the different committees as well, just to make it a little bit more clear as to what they can and cannot do. So the next definition I was suggesting to add is the definition of an alternate member. So this has never been placed into our bylaw. We do have a section that looks at alternate members.
Yeah.
But the definition here will be able to add some clarity and justification around who actually is, excuse me, a member of council and who actually is an alternate member. Because members of council, for example, have some additional privileges, maybe I could say, when it comes to committee meetings. So for example, when we go and get to section 27 under the committee bylaw, all members of council, it simply says members, but all members of council have the ability to attend committee meetings and have the ability to provide comment and participate in the discussion at committee meetings. They just don't have the ability to vote. So members of council have a little bit more privilege in that sense as well. So we haven't had a definition in there of alternate member, but because the municipal act was changed during this term of council to add a little bit more criteria around alternate members. Previously, the township could add an alternate member if a councillor was going to be away for an extended period of time, because again, under the municipal act, if you miss 3 consecutive meetings, you've vacated your seat. So they've always had that section in there that the townships could provide an alternate member if a member is going to be away for an extended period of time. But over this term of council, they've actually added a new section 268, which provides an alternate member if you're going to just simply miss a meeting. So for example, as we saw at the last council meeting, if a councillor is not able to attend, an alternate can come in his place. So there's been some additions around alternate members. So I just think it's important that we clearly define that an alternate member is the one that's assigned by the townships.
That alternate member has all the privileges of.
So they have, and that section is looked at under members of council. So they do have the privilege of attending, excuse me, of attending the council meetings. They do not have the ability to come to, so for example, if an alternate member, if a member of council is going to be away for 3 months, the alternate member can come to council, but I don't believe they have authority at the advisory committees.
What about the closed session? Excuse me. What about the closed session? Does the elder member participate in closed sessions?
So there was some discrepancy around that, but from what I'm seeing here, yes, they are able to attend closed session. So they're under the section with alternate members. It does allow an alternate member, if your municipality has assigned an alternate member, they can come to a council meeting and simply watch the council meeting so that they get a grasp of what happens at county council and some of the ways that our procedures work. But if they're just coming as an attendee to view the meeting, they're not able to go into closed session. That was what was in the bylaw for that. So there's nothing actually in there that states that when they're acting on behalf of the member of council, that they cannot go into closed session. So again, when we get to that section, the committee may want to look at, do you want the alternates to be able to go into closed session? But again, an alternate member is a little bit different than the public because they are an elected official. They do adhere to a code of conduct, and they do answer to the public here, to the township council as well as county council.
The alternate member has to be an elected councillor to come to
Yes.
county council. But in the old, where you're saying a difference because the alternate couldn't vote. That's what your notes are saying here. Am I reading it correctly?
So, sorry, under my notes, I think what it means is that the full members of council, so they differentiate full members and alternate members of council, given that the word member is used throughout the bylaw. So when we use the word member throughout the bylaw, we're specifically talking about councillors, county councillors. And so it's used throughout the bylaw, specifically under the committee section, which allows members of county council to attend and participate at committee meetings, but you're not able to vote there. So for
So
example,
if you're not appointed to that committee as
That's
county
correct.
council, when you go as ex officio, now the ex officio can vote,
the ex officio can vote, yes.
right? But other members who wish to attend, other members who wish to attend, even though they're not on that committee, they can partake of the discussions, but they can't, when it comes to a vote of that committee, they can't vote.
That's correct.
Okay, is that understood?
So
There's an example, would that be like the building committee? They can't vote on.
So for an example would be, let's say perhaps next week, let's take this committee, for example. Let's say that Warden Vanderwall, well, that's not a good example, he's ex officio. Let's say Councillor Smith wanted to attend this meeting because she's interested in the procedural review bylaw. So she can participate, she can add to the discussion, but if it comes to a vote on a motion, she cannot vote. If that makes sense. And so the reason that that's been in the bylaw, and again, committees are a little bit less stringent than full council, but under the bylaw, members of the public are not actually able to participate at council meetings or committee meetings unless they register as a deputation. So if we have a community development committee meeting and 3 members of the public come, they can't just start participating in the discussion. They have to be registered as a delegation. So that differentiates a member of council. If you want to go to the CDAC committee meeting, you are, because you're a councillor, that committee reports to you, you have the ultimate say, you are able to go to those meetings and participate in the discussion. So that's where that differentiation is coming. So we speak about members throughout the bylaw, but when we say members, and perhaps that should be, I may actually have it in the definitions that a member, yes. So a member, it defines a member as a councillor of the corporation of the county. So this just differentiates an alternate member.
Could that word elected member be added, make it any clearer?
So an alternate member under the act, they're appointed by the township. So the elected piece falls on the township's criteria. So alternate members here are appointed by the township. And if we go to the section on alternate members, it may be a little bit clearer that they are elected officials, but technically under the act, they are appointed by the townships.
Not to jump the gun then, is that the reason why the alternate members are not allowed to run for warden?
So again, so you're looking at two different things. The alternate member that we're defining in here is a member that's appointed by the townships to take any one of your places if you can't attend a meeting. It's not the alternate, so county council is comprised of the 4 mayors and what we call a second member council.
Right.
Not an alternate member. You are a second member councillor.
Right.
So the alternate members are appointed by the townships pursuant to sections 257 and 267 and 268 of the Municipal Act to come to county council if a full member is not able to attend a meeting or they're going to be away for an extended period of time. Similar to, so an alternate member, for example, would be Councillor Fowler, who attended our meeting the other week.
Yeah, I understand. We're just, my mind is throwing ahead a little bit here. So I have no problem with that. Either of you have any problems with those additions? Okay.
So the next suggestion here is to add the meaning of motion to postpone. So we did have this motion, and it's used actually quite often, a motion to defer.
Yeah.
But under Robert's Rules of Order, a motion to defer should be avoided. And this, so my explanation there is pulled from Robert's Rules of Order. So it says, states that a motion to defer should be avoided since it is often subject to vague usage. And Robert's Rules of Order suggest that you use the motion to postpone. And again, a motion to postpone would be then put into our motion section as well, under its criteria, which is debatable. And
So you're suggesting, if I'm clearing it, is on a motion to defer would be replaced with motion to postpone.
that's correct.
Um,
And that's totally council's option. I'm just, our procedural bylaw refers to Robert's Rules of Order if it's not contained in the bylaw. We use Robert's Rules of Order to develop our bylaw. So, and a motion to defer is very common. It's a very common term used. It's just that under Robert's Rules of Order, if somebody were to ask me what's Robert's Rules of Order say on a motion to defer, it would be, well, they don't have it. They suggest motion to postpone, which is the same thing. And here's the rules behind it. So it's just a technical question, a technical amendment. But again, it's council's call of whether they like the word defer or if they prefer to go with postpone.
Okay,
Committee agree with that?
Yeah, I do, because I think when you say postpone, it implies a specific date, whereas defer, I seem to deferred, you never hear it again. Like, I really think that postpone is right.
postpone means like till next meeting or
Yeah,
something.
like the specific date.
If you have a motion to postpone, does it come with any caveat as to when you're going to reconsider it?
So that would typically be included in the motion, and I quite often, when council throws those types of motions on the floor, I will ask them, when did you want this brought back? So for example, the motion to postpone would be, moved by councillor, seconded by councillor so that the motion be postponed to allow staff to dialogue with the townships on this specific issue and report back to council. So when it's something like that, then it goes on our abeyance list. I do keep an abeyance list in the office to say when things are deferred or postponed or requested by council of staff, and it's discussed with senior leadership when we do have those. So it's usually in the motion. You wouldn't just say a motion to postpone, or if you were to say a motion to postpone, that's when your clerk would probably turn her mic on and say, when do you want that postponed to? So we would ensure that that information is contained in the resolution.
Okay, then go down a few lines to the motion to table. When it means a motion to postpone without defining a definite date as to when the matter will be considered. That's the difference between the two. Now, what I want to understand is if you table a motion, what is the criteria which to bring it back for discussion? Some directions there.
So I believe if you table a motion with nothing around it, it will sit there and it'll go on to an abeyance list. And at the end of the term of council, so a councillor can ask that it be brought back. So for example, under your notices of motion, you can have a motion there that says, this motion that was tabled on such and such date should be brought back to the whatever council agenda. Put that into a motion. But it would also go on to our abeyance list, anything that's tabled like that, which would sit there because it wouldn't really be senior leadership's call to bring it back because you haven't asked them to. But at the end of the council term, I bring a report to council to say, this is your abeyance list. Here's what's still outstanding on it. How would you like it to be addressed? In the previous council, there were a few items that were still on the abeyance list, and they opted to just remove them, that they died. They just died, no further action. So we do keep records in our office of all the motions that are still sort of outstanding, perhaps is a better word. Or for example, when you passed a motion requesting that staff reach out to there was resolution that asked staff to reach out to AMO to have them come and speak to county council on policing, when the policing issue with the OPP became an issue. And that sat on our abeyance list because AMO simply would not send anybody. And at the end of the council term, the abeyance list was brought to council with an explanation of here's the status of the outstanding motions. Here's the work done to date. AMO's simply not going to come. Council opted to remove it.
So for most of the table motions, they die with the council at the end of term.
That's probably a better definition for a table motion, a motion that you just want to die, but you don't want to vote against, so. But a tabled motion is basically, it's off the table until somebody brings it back on.
An example, I just had a notice of motion. I want to establish a boat launch on the Mississippi River in one of our wards. And you bring in a notice of motion and council agree or disagree to bring it forward at the next meeting, that subject. If they agree to bring it forth the next subject or next meeting, that subject, then they'll vote on whether or not somebody should sit down as a staff member, write an amendment report or whatever to establish that particular project, whatever it is. But if I didn't bring that forward, it would just never happen. Like it would die. I see where Jeanette's coming from. Like important things could get lost just in the system, you know?
Well,
Should there be a follow-up routine?
she did mention there is a follow-up.
Yeah, there is, but it doesn't happen until the end of council though.
So so there's a couple of options that we can look at later on in the bylaw. We actually come to the agenda itself, and the agenda itself lays out your order of business. And so you can opt to add items to that order of business. You can opt to
Tabled issues.
you can opt to have for example, the abeyance list attached to the end of each agenda. Or you can opt to, and perhaps maybe this is a good opportunity for us to add another definition of abeyance list. And we can specifically define that abeyance list as, and whether it's a definition or whether it goes under the council agenda. There could be a section in there that, that speaks to an abeyance list, that the clerk keeps an abeyance list. And then perhaps you might want to say that this abeyance list is brought each quarter to council.
Mhm.
So it doesn't have to wait until the end of the council term. This county, so I should rephrase that an abeyance list is something that we had when I worked at another municipality. So it's something that I brought with me here because I was seeing that councillors were often, with a previous term of council, they were quite often sending resolutions requesting staff or reports on this, or this. And I just noticed that, at times I was looking at the agenda thinking, when is that report going to come forward? So I started collecting and I started making that abeyance list. Now there's been nothing added to it, I don't think, for this term of council, because there's been no direction of sorts. But we do keep that. So I do keep that abeyance list, and once a month, senior leadership meets to discuss the upcoming council agenda. And that was when the abeyance list was brought to senior leadership. And I would say, these are the resolutions from council that are still outstanding. What is the status on them? And my abeyance list would actually give dates, on this date, this was the status, on this date, this was the status. But again, if council would like to see that on a quarterly basis, it could be a report. We often have quarterly reports in terms of a variance report from finance. We have quarterly report from Fairmount Home.
Does that take a lot of staff time?
I don't think so. The report itself would be a repeat report of every council meeting, right? So the abeyance list is always maintained. So each time it goes to senior leadership and there's action taken before it gets to the council as a motion, it's always updated and always kept. So to bring a report to council would just be, You know, the background is county council, during its procedural bylaw review, felt that this should be brought to council on a quarterly basis, and then the comments would be, please note the attached abeyance list to date, and then I would give the dates, and I would just attach the abeyance list, which I already have and updated. So it's not a lot of work by any means.
When I first became a counselor, I wasn't aware of what went on before me in previous councils, and I would have an idea,
Well,
unless it died at the end of the council.
that would be the caveat.
Because
You're thinking.
we're coming to the end of this council now. And I'm thinking the next council. Although, like you said, we haven't had anything yet, so.
No, sorry, the previous council, or the one before that, had a lot of things thrown at staff, so, and
So I read the
we
paper.
really kept a good detailed list of what they were looking for. And it's important as well, because, you know, you are the head of the corporation, you are the decision makers, and when you make a motion asking us to do something, and rightfully so, we need to make sure that it's
And
done.
I noticed, I heard things referred to, I didn't know anything about. From previous councils. I wasn't aware of it was an issue until I heard someone, Dennis, for instance, speak up.
Okay, anything else on that? Feel comfortable with what's been put before us? I guess we were still discussing the motion to postpone. And we got, I brought up the, I brought up the motion to table. Let's deal with what's before us in regard to this, and then if any of us have another issue in regard to this, before we move on to two. Or do you want to, do you feel more comfortable, like I have on that list, HH. Morning, sir. Morning, good morning. HH present means physically in attendance at the meeting. Should we add something, or we're adopting something in regard to having the ability to attend the meeting by Zoom?
No, you're absolutely correct. That is one that I had missed, because I was thinking the same thing as well. And maybe it's under quorum. So you're looking at which one?
I'm looking at the original list that you provided with us. For,
Yes,
and I just gone down, I've made several points here. I'm on HH. That's after GG, point of privilege.
no, you're absolutely correct. Sorry, that does need to be amended. So
Just
a
go on the
present.
definitions. You'll catch up.
So we would need to amend this to, it means, we could take out the word physically. It means attendance at a meeting, either in person or virtual.
That's really where I was coming from, because we're, at some point, we're going to be putting in a whole section in regard to electronic meetings. So somewhere in the definition.
So, and I do apologize because I missed putting it into this sheet. So in my notes here, I have, how can we reword this to accommodate electronically present? So we can have either reword this definition. I also have, do we want to use two definitions? So do you want to include two definitions? So for example, do we want to include physically present, or and a different definition for present in virtual format, and then define what virtual format is? But I think either way works.
Sure.
I think to keep it simple, I think
Yeah.
just keeping it present. So it would mean, present means attendance at a meeting either in person or through virtual format.
Right. Just reckoning, when we get further on and you start to describe it, you can give it a better description. Right? You agree?
Yes.
Okay. Does any member of the committee in regard anything else in this page you're going down here when you're reading, was there anything else that in that area? One to speak to and maybe carry on to that.
Okay, so the other one was to add the definition of ombudsman, and this would also include removing. We have the definition here, closed meeting investigator. So previously, the county had its own closed meeting investigator. We had appointed our own.
Right.
We no longer do that. We appoint the ombudsman. So it would mean that we really need to define what the ombudsman is so that people actually know it's the ombudsman means the ombudsman that is appointed under the Ombudsman's Act. Because ombudsman could mean an ombudsman that we've appointed ourselves at the county. We have every right to appoint our own ombudsman, but we haven't done that. So I think it's clear that we make sure that we know that the ombudsman it's deferring to the provincial ombudsman.
That's actually new legislation, is that correct? Recently?
It's not new legislation in terms of closed meeting investigator. So I'm seeing here, item G is the closed meeting investigator, and it simply means the body authorized by council to investigate. And I believe I may have it as a deleted one, or we would need to delete that because we no longer use it. But closed meeting investigator has been there for a while. The Municipal Act allows the municipality to either appoint their own or to default to the Ontario Ombudsman. The Municipal Act also lets you appoint your own ombudsman. However, the ombudsman, the new legislation that I believe you're referring to, is now giving the ombudsman power over the municipalities to do an investigation on complaints.
Right.
So, and a complaint outside of a closed meeting. So for example, if a member of the public is not happy with, let's just throw it out there, the KNP Trail. So they complain to the county. They don't like the answer that they got. So they go to their counselor. They still don't like the answer that they got. They can complain to the ombudsman. It's about any complaint, not just closed meetings.
Right.
So that's the new legislation that came into Bill 68 that you're referring to.
Right. That's
Which gives oversight.
Right.
And then the next one was to specifically define a 2/3 majority vote, because there are a number of sections in the bylaw, including the procedural bylaw itself, that does require a 2/3 vote. So we've just added that definition as well.
any problem with that addition? Remember?
No.
So those were the only new definitions that I have suggested needed adding. Is there anything in your eyes that you feel is not defined in here that you've experienced in the past where something wasn't clear to you that you feel maybe it should have a definition? Just before I get into the amended ones.
Anything to add? Jerry?
Like,
Nothing else? I had made a note on minutes. I wonder, minutes, a record without note or comment, all resolutions, decisions, other proceeding, council and committee meetings. I wrote in the word not verbatim. Is that needed?
Well, I'm not sure if it's needed because verbatim simply means that I'm typing 100 words of minutes,
Yes.
capturing every single word that you say.
Right.
But our minutes don't capture anything you say. The committee minutes capture a little bit more information than what council does. And again, previously where I worked, there was a thing right on the top of the minutes that said these minutes are not verbatim.
Right. reason I suggested is that it's because a lot of the discussion is being electronically, which was broadcast. I wonder if somebody is listening to what somebody said in here and they are writing it down almost verbatim. And then that discussion doesn't show up in the minutes anywhere. So maybe the disclaimer saying minutes are not recorded verbatim would be suffice. But I don't know whether we have to recognize the changing environment of us broadcasting all of our meetings.
Because what you're saying is people could record it and then, like,
And
then go back to the minutes and say, we heard you say this, but it's not recorded in the minutes, or, you know. I don't know how much more you have to say about that.
so the definition here that we have for minutes is actually pulled directly from the municipal act. So this is what the municipal act states, that minutes are a record without note of comment of all resolutions, decisions, and other proceedings of council and committee meetings. So that's specifically pulled from the municipal act. And again, in a council meeting, if you ever look at the council minutes, there is absolutely no comment captured in that. There is comment captured and in the committee meetings. Not a lot, but there is some, and I'm wondering if we have a section here that specifically deals with, if we look under, when we get to the committee section, which is section again 27. Just wondering if there's a section 27 that looks at minutes, and if not. So section 27.10, clerk shall be the secretary. And again, it allows clerk or designate. The clerk or designate shall be the secretary of all committee meetings and shall be present at all meetings. The clerk shall record the proceedings of the committee or council in the form of minutes. Perhaps that's, and I can make a note right now, so that when I'm going through this, perhaps that's where we could add that.
Yeah.
That minutes are not verbatim. The minutes shall reflect that they are not verbatim. We could add that there.
Members, do you have anything else on definition? Might want to read forward. Kelly? No? Okay. You're well defined.
So there's just a few there that we're suggesting some amendments to. So we're suggesting to amend the definition, amend the committee definition to include ad hoc. So right now the committee definition is any standing committee, subcommittee, advisory committee, or task force. So we would just want to add in there ad hoc, since we are now adding the definition of an ad hoc committee. So that's just a minor change. We're also suggesting to amend the definition of committee of the whole to committee of the whole means a meeting of all members of council sitting as committee of the whole. So it just really defines or clears it up that they're all members of council. So
What do you mean by
it
that?
makes it sure that.
sorry, I don't understand.
So currently, right now, committee of the whole is defined as it means a meeting of council. It doesn't say who's there. So I just wanted it to be clear that it's not a meeting of council. It is a meeting where all members of council are members of the committee. But it needs to be cleared up that it is not a council meeting. So that's simply what this definition does. So right now it's defined as a meeting of council at which the rules are suspended. But committee of the whole is not a meeting of council. It is a meeting with all members of council, but it is not a meeting of council. So I just wanted to clear that up. if that makes sense. So for example, when you meet as committee of the whole, even when you're in a regular council meeting and you move into committee of the whole, you always pass that resolution at the end that you're moving out of committee of the whole and that the report of the committee of the whole be adopted. Because committee of the whole holds no power, it all sits with council. And when you're sitting as committee of the whole, it is a committee. It's a committee of council the same way as CDAC, the same way as Planning Advisory Committee. It's a committee of council, but it is not council. And I know that's difficult to get your head around because every municipality uses it. They can move in and out of committee of the whole, or they may have a specific meeting of committee of the whole. A good example was yesterday's budget meeting when the CAO brought forward that the new funding announcement in terms of Fairmount Home and stated that we're going to be bringing this forward to the November council meeting. There was no point in you passing a motion yesterday because we cannot act on it until it's fully confirmed by council. So that's why I just wanted to clear up this definition that it's not a meeting of council. It is a meeting of all the elected members of council. Does that make sense, Kelly? Yeah.
No, sorry. County council meeting is actually defined by a specific date and time with all of the executives in present, right? A committee of council could be something less than that, where it's actually discussing issues and bringing a recommendation forward. Am I correct in understanding that?
That's correct. And a council is when we put a, so a council meeting, I mean, it could be a specific date and time. It could be a special council meeting. You could have a joint council meeting, but a council meeting is a council meeting where you're sitting as council. So, but in our council meetings, for example, you open the meeting and you sit as council. But after we get through the adoption of the minutes and the delegations and the presentations, you actually move a motion to move into committee of the whole. So what that means is that you're no longer council, you're moving into a committee meeting. And because you're moving into a committee meeting, the rules of the procedural bylaw are relaxed a little bit. So for example, if you didn't move into committee of the whole, the procedural bylaw states how many times a councillor can speak and for how long. So I believe it's once or twice that you can speak and you're limited to, say, for example, 5 minutes. Whereas when you move into committee of the whole, those rules are relaxed a little bit. So you could speak more than twice if you have, it just allows for a more wholesome discussion. So it relaxes those rules. But you're not, at that point, you're no longer council, you're committee of the whole. So that is why, as I said, when we get through all of those items, you're actually moving a motion to rise from committee of the whole and revert back to council. And there's a second motion there that's moved that the report of the committee of the whole be adopted and the necessary actions and bylaws be approved. Because when you're in committee of the whole, it's not council any longer. So anything you do in committee of the whole needs a separate motion as full council to be adopted. So that's why I just wanted to clear up, because committee of the whole can be as part of your council meeting, or it can be a separate meeting, as we saw yesterday with budget, where it's just a totally separate meeting. But it just needs to be clearly defined that it's not a meeting of council. It's actually a meeting where all members of council come together to sit as committee of the whole.
Basically, I think to carry that on is we didn't adopt the budget yesterday. Right? So it's just recommendation. to
As a
council.
committee
Okay.
of the whole
That's all. Because
yesterday.
Kelly hasn't donated this amount of money.
So if it helps at all, I've been doing this for almost 30 years. And I, for the life of me, for the first 20 years, could not understand committee of the whole. And I was continually saying, what is that? But now I do understand.
Yeah, our
It's
local
just-
municipal level, we don't use committee of the whole.
Pardon?
We don't use committee of the whole. At our local municipal level.
I just understood it just now.
I did too. The light came on.
So, microphone off. You started working with this at 12?
9.
7.
Okay, we accept that. All right, let's move on to the next section, your
So the other ones are quite simple. We're going to remove LPAT because LPAT no longer exists. So if committee can recall, we used to have the Ontario Municipal Board, and that went and was disbanded and it turned into LPAT. But at the LPAT, when complaints or appeals went to LPAT could actually send it back to a municipal council. So we just wanted to, so we had to update our procedural bylaw to reflect that motions for reconsideration to reflect LPAT, because at that point it wouldn't have been a reconsideration. So we're just going to remove the definition of LPAT, and you'll see later on as well that we'll be removing other things in terms of LPAT because it no longer exists. And then,
You're saying the local planning tribunal doesn't exist, or the OMB doesn't exist?
so it started out as the OMB. It then turned to LPAT. It's now the Ontario Land Tribunal.
Oh, okay.
But the criteria, and maybe Kelly could speak to this, the criteria around the Ontario Land Tribunal is a little different in that when appeals are sent there, they're not actually going to look at it and send it back to the municipality to change anything. Is that correct, Kelly?
Yeah, they've got more power than the OMB or the LPAT, in that they can make unilateral decisions, and there is restricted appeal opportunities. So you can't just appeal, you have to have been a party to it. The applicant can appeal, but a neighbor can't necessarily appeal. So it's becoming more developer friendly. How's that?
Yeah, that's really what I. If those changes, have they, Shelley, I might go off tangent here a little bit, have they come to any agreement on timeframes to reach conclusions on these cases?
Yeah, good question for Joe, but I think they're still in place. So the 60 days and the 90 days that were in the old act from the date of completion of the application, deeming complete by the municipalities. I can check with Joe, but I don't think those disappeared. The act is still the same.
Right, and if you still haven't, then that's when they ask for an extension.
Yeah, so the trick is when the application is deemed complete, then the municipal clock starts ticking.
Right.
Now, not all developers are going to appeal on the 61st day if it's a 60-day window. You know, if everybody's moving along reasonably. But with plans of subdivision, it gets tricky. Then a couple appeal on the first day that they're eligible. So, yeah,
Not that.
not that it wasn't going their way. So
Yeah.
let's just be.
Okay.
Make a comment. Kelly, does this stop the frivolous neighbor next door appeals?
It'll help with that. The act still refers to frivolous and vexatious, but OMB held that to a very, very high bar. And, you know, the Ontario Land Tribunal has only been in existence for a couple of months. It's going to take a while to see if they take a more strident view of frivolous and vexatious. But I think that is the intent of the province, is to eliminate a lot of those.
Okay, enough discussion there. That.
And then the
Okay.
last one was just to remove the motion to defer because that's now being replaced with the motion to postpone.
Okay. Everybody concur? Okay, good enough.
So that was it in terms of definitions, but I just wanted to, on a side note, so I just have a question on the committee, and it could fall a little further on. So as we go through the bylaw and we make additional changes, it may require us to come back to definitions and add definitions for it. But just to keep your mind open on a definition for communications devices. So do we want to allow communications devices in the meeting? Do we want to define those? Do we want to limit them? I'm not sure what other municipalities are doing. I know when I was at one former municipality, you were not allowed to bring communication devices, for example, into a closed session. So I'm just, do we want to put a definition around that? And do we want to even look at that? Do you want to allow communication devices in closed session? Do you want to allow councillors to bring their cell phones in? It just
Look what
throwing
happened-
that.
look what happened to all of us with the mayor.
Sorry, the YouTube. video
Well, sorry, but a year or so ago, what happened in Carlton Place with the mayor, he was recording closed sessions with his cell phone. And so that could be really, really dangerous. We should disallow those devices. What's your feeling, Bruce?
Well, the discussion the discussion that's going on is not to go outside that circle. So you might just all eliminate recording it. But isn't it recorded within the meeting itself? Because
Not closed. So our open public meetings are fully recorded and live on YouTube, but not closed.
okay, so I think they should be disallowed.
The difficulty is, I'll use Warden Vanderwall as an example. He uses an iPad. You can just press record on his iPad. It's not just a phone anymore. My computer will record it. How do we go back to paper at that point? I guess it's pretty tough. I agree, and I follow that case, but what's the practical result is that we're conducting a meeting with paper.
So he's not allowed to play that back to anybody outside the circle.
Well, in the Carlton Place example, anyway, so two different things. It's not allowed, and if you do it, it's a violation.
Yeah.
Or banning them so that you guarantee that it doesn't happen. And all I'm saying is if you ban it, then you have to ban laptops, iPads, cell phones, and go right straight to paper. Because any device on anybody's desk at this point for a conversation.
No question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Jeanette, if one of the council members is calling it from remote to remote station someplace, but he's on vacation or whatever, and we're using Zoom, can they participate in the closed session?
So if the committee will recall, when we were in the, when we were not having in-person meetings, the email went out to council that you had to sign a confidentiality thing. You had to confirm with me that you were the only one in the room
Right.
and that you were not recording the meeting. I can't remember exactly what it said, but if you recall, those were sent out to council when we were actually in that part. And so again, this may be a bigger conversation when we get up to the discussion on electronic meetings. How do you want to handle electronic meetings? And then it may get into the discussion of closed meetings. And when we figure out what we're going to do around criteria around electronic meetings, well, how will that turn into closed session? So that can be a conversation that we keep on the back burner when we get to section 9. And then I think we're recommending under, we haven't got to it yet, but we are recommending under meetings to sort of clear it up as to all the types of meetings. And because of the importance of it, closed meeting is being given its own separate section. So, and we've gotten I have some preliminary thoughts on it, but again, it really is how you want to deal with closed meetings, how you want to tie them into electronic meetings.
Well, we have one elected member where I work that he just simply can't, he's never in the area because of his job. He's an interior hydro foreman, and he's always gone. And so we allow him to participate in our meetings electronically, including those meetings. So that's why I asked the question, because we're currently doing that. I just wondering what county council think of that.
Maybe the compromise is to explicitly prohibit it, and then it truly is a violation. Whether you're using it for personal purposes or like the mayor of Carlton Place distributing it to developers, it's expressly prohibited. Now, the mayor of Carlton Place was suspended, his pay was suspended for 270 days, but if it's explicit in the procedural bylaw that you cannot record it, it would still allow you to have the device there if you did. integrity commissioner is going to come down on you pretty hard.
And I think the comment from Councillor Martin, if I've heard you correctly, it's more the concern of if we're in a closed session and that council member is not physically present, they're electronically present. And how do we know that at that point, because he's on his phone or he's on his laptop, how do we know that the information, if he's the only one in the room, let alone recording it? Are you the only one in the room? Are you doing it in your truck with your partner beside you? You know, it just,
That's right.
so again, that might be a thought in terms of looking at your own specific procedural bylaws. Well, and we can, you know, I mean, once we get through this, it
It's
may,
a learning process.
for sure. It's a learning process for all of us. And like I mentioned yesterday, I really think the province is bringing us into the modern era and there potentially is more to come. So,
Well, in the way of definition, I guess that's what we're looking at, is do we want to put anything in the definitions in regard to closed meeting, electronic means being banned in closed meetings. I think Kelly makes a good point, is that if you actually know and understand that electronic means is not allowed in closed meetings, although all of our closed sessions, we've been doing all of our meetings virtually since the pandemic began, and we do all of our closed sessions virtually also. The only, in all of that is, as an elected council member, you have to understand the ramifications of allowing that information to go public. Because I know when you're discussing solicitor advice during a closed session, or buying or selling a property or whatever, or personnel, if that gets out, the only way it's going to get out is if somebody that was involved in that meeting has allowed it to get out. So there should be, or well, probably will be an investigation, in which case you're probably going to have to fall on your own sword. But do we make a definition of electronic means? Any statement in the terminology?
so again, we can maybe just leave it until we get to the closed session point and to the electronic
Sure.
meeting and then see what the committee feels about what they want to do with those.
Interesting stuff.
And then if we feel that a definition needs to be added, we can certainly come back and add that.
The other one that a couple of municipalities having the debate is that the only official recording is the recording made by the municipality. Because Bill could record it. I'm picking on Bill. It'd be more likely Sharon. Sharon could record it, then doctor the tape. So explicitly stating that where meetings are recorded, the only official recording is the one made by the municipality, not one made by a member or a member of the public.
The issue, I see it during closed meetings, is information that's being discussed that's going to perhaps sway some contract going out ahead of time. So it gives someone the advantage over other people who don't have that information. That's the kind of information that bothers me a little bit if it comes out, or
Oh, property issues, this, or, you know.
Yeah.
Purchase property or something.
so. Anyway, I think
Why don't we say that recording it in a closed session is not allowed?
Mhm.
Can't we just say that now?
So we will get to I think it's under the meetings, so we are coming up to that, it's under the meetings section. So there's a specific section around closed meetings that we can.
and after that discussion happens, and if we feel that we need a definition, we can come back and put it in. Right? Okay, let's move on.
So section 2 of the bylaw is application, and I think the only comment that I had here was so under 2.1 is a lengthy paragraph, and it states that the rules of procedure set out in this bylaw shall govern all proceedings of council and committee, which is correct. But it also includes in there that any parts of the bylaw may be suspended by a resolution clearly identifying. So I'm suggesting that that be split up into two sections, two separate sections. And I say that because suspending the rules of the bylaw is quite a serious thing.
Yes.
And so it really should have its own section. It really needs to clearly define that it requires a 2/3 vote, which it does. So I'm going to suggest that we take section 2.1 and leave it as the first sentence, that the rules of procedure shall govern both council and committees. And then we're going to add another section 2.2. So, and it's quite a bit lengthy because currently it just says that any parts of this bylaw may be suspended by resolution clearly indicating the purpose of by 2/3 vote. And that technically is incorrect. Because there are certain pieces of this bylaw which you cannot waive. You cannot waive quorum. Quorum is set for you. You cannot waive that. You cannot show up at a
No.
meeting
No,
and
that's right.
waive quorum.
Yeah.
So what we're looking at is adding a new section 2.2. So it says suspension of the rules of procedure. So it's going to be subject to 2.c, which we'll come down to a little later. So it's going to say that any parts of this bylaw may be suspended by resolution if agreed upon by a 2/3 vote majority of the members present, providing that the motion is in order. So we want to make sure the motion is in order. So number 2 is suspension shall only apply to the rule and or procedure which is stated within the motion. So for example, you can't just pass a blanket motion that we're going to waive the procedural bylaw. You have to pass a motion to say we're going to waive section, say 2.1 of the procedural bylaw to allow an additional motion on the floor. So we want to make sure that we clearly state in the motion what we're waiving the procedural bylaw for, and that it only covers that one piece. And then again, it's notwithstanding 2.2a, which is that the rules can be waived. The following rules of procedure may not be suspended. So for example, quorum is necessary. You cannot suspend quorum. And technically you couldn't suspend the bylaw for quorum anyway, because you need quorum to call the meeting order in
Right.
order to pass the motion. So
Right.
the motion to reconsider the rules set out in 21.9 and 21.10 of the bylaw. And those rules are, if we look at, sorry, I should have written down in my comments what 21.10 are. So those rules are for reconsideration. So a reconsideration requires a 2/3 vote. It's specifically set out in Robert's Rules of Order how we deal with a motion for reconsideration. So you want to make sure that we cannot waive the procedural bylaw to just throw all that out the window and just put anything on the floor. So then we're also going to, so quorum, reconsideration. So any rules or procedures that are set out by legislation. So the municipal act, for example, requires that we do not record note or comment in the minutes. That's clear in legislation. So we can't waive the procedural bylaw to say, let's put that in the minutes. Would just be my thought. Now, that being said, these are just some of the things that are kind of legislated, but are there other things that you want to put in here that you don't want waiving? So for example, do you want a committee to have the ability to waive the procedural bylaw? Because if they do, they're technically overruling council. So you may want them to be able to waive the procedural bylaw, for example, to have an additional delegation. That would seem in there, right? So you actually waive the procedural bylaw when you approve an addendum type thing, because it carries a 2/3 vote, because the procedural bylaw clearly sets out that your agenda goes out on this date and that everything needs to be on it. So let's say a delegation wants to come and speak, or they want a motion to come on the floor by a member of the committee that's not been given notice. So and they want to consider it that day. Do we want them to have the ability to waive the procedural bylaw for that? I'm just throwing certain things out there. There are things that the
I
committee
think
may need
I
to.
think that's an actually important asset to have, because there are always issues that come up from the time we use our own council. We receive our council information on Friday before the meeting. Well, something might happen either in personnel or contracts or whatever, that might happen Monday, our meetings are Tuesday, Monday or Tuesday, of which staff then brings something forward. Well, we have to waive the rules of procedure in which to entertain that because we've already received the agenda. Or there might be something like Kelly last night, in our procedure bylaw, deputations are down near the end. Well, we changed the order of procedure to allow Kelly and Joe to make the presentation.
And the pickleball people.
Pardon?
And the pickleball people.
That's right, to get that off the agenda because we had a fairly full one and we didn't. So we didn't want Kelly to miss his sleeping time and have to come on council at 8 o'clock. So anyway, that's a key. So that's an example of having the power to be able to change the procedure a little bit.
And so again, as we go through the bylaw, maybe perhaps keep that in the back of your minds about when we're coming up to specific sections in the bylaw where you realize that, oh, this could be waived. Do we really want a committee to be able to waive that? Most municipalities do allow committees to waive the procedural bylaw as well. But again, now that with this procedural bylaw, now that you've added specific pieces to what can and cannot be waived, it may just be sufficient. But it's just something to keep in the back of your head as to, you know, the rules that you, for example, section 27 puts out rules in terms of committees. So we certainly don't want committees to be able to waive section 27 because those are the rules that you have set out for them. Just something to keep in the back of your heads, because other municipalities, sometimes, I know when I was at the city of Kingston, they actually have a separate bylaw, or they did have a separate bylaw for committees. I'm not sure if they still do, but. So just to keep that in the back of your minds. So, and then the next one that I had was section 2.4. And that was to update this to indicate what specifically edition of Robert's rules that we are using. So currently right now there's so many editions of Robert's rules. Right now I'm using edition, the 11th edition.
Why don't we just stay the latest edition and we never have to update it?
I'm actually not sure if there's another edition after 11. Is there, Kelly, or-
I think number 8 or so on my desk.
I had attended a workshop on the procedural bylaw review, and it was a workshop that showed us how to go through the whole thing and what we should and shouldn't be doing that. And one of the key points that they had made is to make sure that, you know, you're identifying in your procedural bylaw what you default to. So for example, we default to Robert's rules, some default to Borno's rules. Jim Lockery now has his own set of procedural rules.
It's up to 12 now.
Oh, it's up to 12. But they were clear to say, make sure you're identifying which edition that you are using, because obviously each edition changes. So you want to make sure that if we're going to default to Robert's rules, we're defaulting to the right one.
So Robert's rules would have an updated version to include electronic meetings with it.
You have to buy version 12 to find out, or 11 or whatever it is.
11 wouldn't have it in there.
No.
I don't think so. The electronic meetings are something.
12 was released September of 2020.
So it could be in there.
But for the purposes of this, why don't we just say the latest edition of Robert's Rule,
Right.
Yeah,
generally available in Canada? And we never have to update that 11 to 12 to 13. Maybe we'll stick 13. As determined by the clerk.
Especially if it's out on Friday. is what you're saying.
3:45.
Order basis.
All right, is everybody members happy with that addition, that latest addition to Robert's rule? Okay,
So the next one, section 3 is locations, meetings, times, and notices of regular council meetings. So we're kind of suggesting that this whole section be incorporated as part of section 6, which is actual council meetings. I'm not sure why it's separated, but it really belongs in, it's just, it should go into section 6 under council meetings. So section 4 would then become section 3. So your procedural bylaw will go by, for example, interpretation, application, and then membership on council. And then after that, we're going to have a whole slew of types of meetings. So it would move to section 6 and it will be incorporated into section 6. Like, I'm not sure why we have, for example, council meetings, and then we have the location and date of them in a whole separate section. They really can be merged together, if that makes sense.
Anything that can shorten it up, I agree.
So then the next section would be section 4, and that's membership on council. And so the only thing that I have there is just a slight technical amendment. So we're going to, under section 4.2, we're going to make a slight change by adding that the declaration will be administered. So currently, right now, it says the declaration is administered by the clerk. So I just want to make a slight technical amendment to say that the clerk at each December inaugural council meeting. So it's going to be administered by the clerk at each December inaugural council meeting. But we're going to add item B, which is it's going to be administered by a justice of the peace at the inaugural meeting of the new council unless unavailable. So we technically have a very pomp and pageantry inaugural council meeting for the new term of council. And it's actually a justice of the peace that comes in and does that. So for the past, since I've been here, 3 terms of council, we've sort of been going against our procedural bylaw when we've done that. So I just wanted, it's a very minor technical thing, but it's just something that we do at that inaugural council of the new council.
Right.
So that's just a
That's-
cleaning up of that.
We're putting on paper what we're actually doing.
That's correct.
Okay.
So that was the only section there. And I believe we were okay. So was there any changes that you wanted to see to the alternate member? So I think it is quite clear there where it says an alternate attending a meeting of county council as an observer only. So they're not acting in their capacity as the alternate, shall leave the room when they go into closed. So if you're coming here as an alternate, when you're acting as the alternate for another counselor, you still have the ability to go into closed. But again, did you want to change this? Obviously, maybe to include that their mileage is covered now. I wouldn't want to include their remuneration because I really don't know how we would figure that
I
out.
could do that.
But I do agree with you, Councillor Martin, that when they do come here, it seems logical that we are paying their mileage.
Yeah, because you're not paying the regular member.
Yeah.
So
So it's no additional cost to,
I say live further away.
I don't think anybody quite was a bit further away.
Are you physically paying that alternate person or the person who's replacing? Like, there's a time, you have to set up a special check just for
That's a problem
the
too.
alternate person?
Well,
How would you
Just for
reimburse it?
mileage is not a big deal.
Yeah.
Putting them in the payroll is a more complex issue.
now, look at this definition, appointment of more than one alternate member during the term of council is not authorized. What happens? You mean you have to appoint an alternate that has to be the same person all during the term of council?
What if they die?
Hmm?
What if they die?
That's what I'm saying. So it's saying here, subsection 2 does not authorize the appointment of more than one alternate member during the term of council,
At a time.
but it doesn't say that.
so this is, and if you give me just a minute, I'll pull it up, but this is pulled directly from the municipal act. And I think the intent here is what it means is that, for example, North Frontenac can't appoint two alternates, say Counselor Fowler and then
English or
Counselor
something.
Hermer, and so then Counselor Martin's not able to attend the meeting, so it defers to Counselor Fowler. Oh, I can't attend either, so we're going to send Counselor Hermer. You can only appoint one alternate. So it's like when they send a second member council to council, they can only send one.
But does the word at a time clarify that?
Yeah, so I'm just going to pull up
What's the accent? We looked at it the other day.
the act.
The other question, comment I have is if you've got two members that cannot attend,
What happens?
what happens?
So the act says, subject to section 2, the council of the local, subject to section 2, which is 257, the council of a local municipality may appoint one of its members as an alternate member of the upper tier council to act in place of a person who is a member of the councils of the local municipality and its upper tier municipality when the person is unable to attend a meeting of the upper tier council for any reason. Limitations. So subject to section 1, it does not authorize the appointment of more than one alternate during the term of council. So that's coming specifically from the act. The appointment of an alternate member to act in place of an alternate member appointed under section 267. So, or the appointment of an alternate head of council of an upper tier municipality. So it's the act that's saying that you cannot, it does not authorize the lower tier to appoint more than one alternate member during the term of council. So that's the act like that.
If this doesn't happen, but if Councillor Fowler dies, what the strict reading of that is that North Frontenac couldn't. Which to me doesn't make sense, and I'm really sure that's probably not.
I think it's an oversight, really.
But it's also saying that if Ron Higgins is the warden, your alternate doesn't become the warden. No. Which with Ron Vanderwall as the current warden, he carries 2 votes. That vote does not get transferred to his extra vote, does not get transferred to his second. Okay. Talking out loud.
I think that's C in the subsection. Says that the subject does not authorize the appointment of an alternate head of council for the county of Frontenac. But in the final analysis, you only can appoint one alternate, even if both of your elected people are away.
But they don't get 2 votes.
Pardon?
So if both Ron and Jerry are away, Fred shows up, but he's 1 vote.
One vote, and in some cases, he has no vote. Okay. Right?
So, and just a little bit of a clarification. So there's 2 sections under the act that allow you to appoint an alternate. The one is for a temporary vacancy. So if there's a temporary vacancy, let's say, for example, Councillor Martin, you go off on a parental leave. Your wife's just had a child and you decided to take parental leave for 4 months. That is a temporary vacancy. So under section 267 of the act, the township can approve and can appoint an alternate for a temporary vacancy. The exception is that this section does not authorize the appointment of an alternate head of council. So that's one alternate or one instance of appointing an alternate. Then we come to section 268, which means you can now, and this is the new provision that came in during the last amendments to the act. So this was a new provision that you can appoint an alternate member to act when you're unable to attend a meeting for any reason. And it's under this section that it says, subject to section 2.1. So we're still under section 268. So I'm gonna guess that these limitations do not apply to section 257. They only, or 267, they only apply to section 268. So you can have only one temporary alternate replacement for the one-offs, but you could also have a separate alternate if, for example, Councillor Martin's gone off on parental leave. So let's say you go off on parental leave, the township can appoint Councillor so-and-so to take your place for the next 6 months. But then they can also appoint an alternate for the one-offs, for if, for example, Councillor Higgins is unable to attend a meeting for any reason.
Well, somebody late for major surgeries, and that could easily happen.
That would have probably been a better example.
I think so too, yeah. I kind of thought so, but that could easily happen. It's just, that's the real world. You know?
Yes. So there are 2 alternates that can be appointed, but one is specifically for if a specific member is off on a temporary leave or surgery. Not for,
And that has to be passed by bylaw, right? Motion of council.
that would be the lower tiers
Yeah.
having to do that.
The council of the day would appoint that individual to replace somebody. Right? So I
Yes, that's
assume that
correct.
Fred, you passed a motion.
We did, Fred's been gone now for 6 months. Fred Berry, I'm talking about. Does that.
Fred Perry's gone for 6 months. Yeah, but he's not a representative.
No, but he could well have been the representative.
But he could have been the representative appointed to replace.
Exactly. That's right.
You're appointed, not elected to a position that comes to county council, the distinction being Bruce Higgs.
We're appointed.
By virtue of being the councillor with the most votes on Howe Island gets that position.
No, that's not the way it works with.
And you're doing the same thing with Central. And same thing with South, they're appointed by council.
Yes, we're appointed,
Yes.
but generally speaking, it's who can do it.
Who's the wisest?
Well, no, I wouldn't say that because I wouldn't allow. But when you look at the makeup of your council.
Yeah.
Who can actually attend all of these meetings in the day?
Yeah.
So,
I'm just saying that for Frontenac Islands, they've got a slightly different, I won't call it a predicament, but a wrinkle in that he is elected to that position rather than appointed to that position, where the other 3 you're appointed rather than elected.
so my discussion, this conversation that happens. But who can serve as county warden? It was thrown at me that we were appointed, not elected. So Bruce can sit as warden. He's the only one along with the 4 mayors because he's elected.
Yeah, I think your actual wording is if the mayor, whatever island the mayor comes from, the person from the other island with the most votes.
Yeah.
So if the warden, if the mayor is from Howe Island, then the person who received the most votes on Wolf Island is the deputy.
Yeah, that's right.
And vis-a-vis county.
So he's essentially voted into that position because of the procedure.
It'd be interesting discussion later on.
Yeah. Interesting.
The change we wanted to make there was the remuneration will be picked up by the county.
Not remuneration mileage.
My-
Yeah, so I will bring that to the next meeting. So I'm making some notes here. So right now, coming back to the next meeting, I'm going to make sure that somewhere in there we have an abeyance list that perhaps may come as a report quarterly. And that we're going to add, we're going to amend the definition of HH present. So that's either personal or through electronic format. And then we're going to amend section 4.4 to come up with some wording that allows the alternate to receive mileage.
The expenses could include a meal allowance, if it was an all-day meeting. It could include other things other than just mileage.
A good terminology would be expenses incurred.
Yes,
So,
directly incurred with the participation.
so before we go through that, so when they come as a member of council, the meals provided, I don't know what other expenses there would be.
So Jerry's away.
Mhm.
And Fred represents the township at an AMO meeting as
You
county
can't do
council.
that.
Yeah, we know.
So I think under here, there's something specific under the alternates. So if we look at the definition, or sorry, if we look at section 4.3. So the council of a local municipality may appoint one of its members as an alternate member of county council to act in place of a person who is a member of county council, which is unable to attend a meeting of council for any reason. It does not authorize the appointment of more than one, sorry, I thought in somewhere here, it doesn't authorize the members to take seats in other places.
Says here, an alternate appointed under section 268 of the municipal act shall be limited to representing the municipality at the meeting of county council, with the exception of the annual inaugural meeting, and not at a meeting of an advisory or a special committee, board, or agency to which the member of the council has been appointed.
So he would never be able to attend AMO
He
one,
or she.
sorry?
They,
Like, I don't see any
Remember
other
that.
expenses that would be incurred. So I would hate to leave that open-ended like that. Because they're only from how we, and that's changeable. So
So
that
what-
coming forward, that is totally changeable, but right now,
But it
they're only able
specifically
to
says-
take council.
It specifically says you can't do it, so.
But do you want to change
we
that?
could change it.
But do we want to say mileage or such other expenses as council may approve?
We could,
Just as an example, it's probably not going to happen, but for example, let's say that we were all forced to take a motel room because
Yeah.
of some kind of,
That's the example I was supposed to give.
Yeah.
yeah,
Ron
sure.
Higgins from.
Yeah.
Monday over to Tuesday, it's cheaper for him to stay at the Dewdrop Inn than to
or if
drive
you,
all the way down and drive all the way back.
yeah, or if you couldn't go home.
We were snowed in.
Snowstorm.
Yeah.
okay. So we can just add it for the alternate would receive mileage or such other expenses as council may approve. Is that,
Member may incur. Way I would describe it.
So I guess slightly different interpretation. I'm not sure Fred should be determining that. Council should be determining that. Fred could say, well, I ate in Verona. I drove all the way there and then I ate Charlotte Lake at the Maples. And I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking it.
Well, I would suggest that when that expense form was turned in, that someone would, I would think someone would question
Well,
it.
I'm the one that signs it, so.
Yeah.
If it says that as the member determines, then I just sign. It says as determined by the council. Then I would sign.
so there's another piece that we can put into this. So for example, if all those expenses that Kelly just mentioned, Councillor Martin did, he's more than able to do that because each member of council here has their own expense account. So you could put in here mileages as the member incurs, and it comes, and we could add criteria into this, that these expenses come from the one who he's replacing their expense account, which is really getting difficult.
Oh,
But that's just a little bit of the difference when Kelly is speaking to, do you really want that alternate member to have that authority? Councillors
Let's just leave it
themselves
at
do
mileage.
have that authority because they have their own expense account, but an alternate does not.
Yeah, and if we just leave it at mileage, so come full circle, if we leave it at mileage and snowstorm of the century happens,
It
then
does happen.
council will have to deal with it, and I'm sure council will act reasonably.
And it's probably not going to just be the alternate.
It'll be probably 7 or 8.
So at all, none of us can go home, so we're going.
So did we
And
want,
we'd have one room.
Yeah, I would think stacking would be allowed.
they all have to sleep together.
That one room might be here somewhere.
so did you want to leave it at mileage, just mileage then?
Yeah.
Would Fred have claimed mileage through North Frontman?
Well, he's instructed to.
And again, as I said, when the report had actually come to council a few years back, when we added these alternate positions, that was the philosophy used, that really they should be, you know, just as you do things on behalf of the county and you submit an expense claim to us, they would be doing this on behalf of the township because their counselor's not able to attend. So mileage would be claimed by the township, or the expenses would be claimed by the township. But as you've pointed out, in terms of mileage, when you actually have to send an alternate, it's saving us money. So is that the intent? Is that fair?
I guess just so long as everybody's clear that we can't claim mileage twice. Yeah, for the tax.
That would be dishonest.
In other words,
You mean, you've just cleared something up in my head. You mean I can't claim mileage twice today?
down and back twice.
Right? Okay, let's move on. 5.3. This is the one that we've had some discussion. about. Oh, sorry.
Okay, so
I'll
we are
move
now on
5.3.
to we're now on to the election of the warden and deputy warden, and the staff had no comments on this section. So I will leave it up to members of the committee if they have any comments.
I have a question in regard to maybe why did we arrive at this 5.3 in the file? Kelly, can you give us some enlightenment? I've said that before. Anyway, can you give us further enlightenment?
Back in 2012 and 13, there was confusion in the procedural bylaw as to the process for electing a warden. And it wasn't clear. And there was a lawsuit that resulted, and this is the wording that council settled on to make it clear who could be elected and what the process was.
Well, that was actually for the term of warden.
Correct.
The 1-year term, but for the actual election of warden
It
and
was,
deputy warden, back in, I think,
Yeah.
2011, it was just 4 mayors.
so it goes back one step further.
Yeah, so it goes back one step further. So county council was just comprised of the 4 mayors, and then that changed in 2000, the election that happened in 2010, the 2010 election, 2010 election. They changed the composition of council to increase it to 8 to sort of distribute the workload. They felt it was too much of a workload. Again, it's before my time. But so they changed the composition of council to the 4 mayors, and then each township was also able to ascend an alternate member. Now, during that new term of council, I can't speak. I'm going to guess it was a gentleman's agreement that it was just the mayors that were able to be elected as warden and deputy warden. And then in the last term of council after that, they just clarified it in the bylaw that it's just the mayors. And I can't really give any indication as to why it's like that.
Okay, perhaps I can give you a little bit of history. First of all, after the restructuring order, there was no county of Frontenac. It was a board of management. And then what happened was that the province of Ontario, every time they sent out some kind of communication to go to all the counties, Frontenac Board of Management never received it because they didn't know what Board of Management Frontenac County was. So that was the reason they went back to the county of Frontenac. Now, during that term, I was mayor in Central Frontenac. I always brought Heather Fox, because she was my perfect minister. because it was too much work then for my small mind to comprehend everything that was going on. She had no voting rights, no nothing. But she sat in the back of the room for every meeting and took notes of what was important. Then some of the other mayors started bringing their clerk administrators for that county council meeting also, because the mandate of county got larger and larger. It's just more to do. So after I left, then the county decided to appoint the second member. But I don't, for the best of me, understand why there was restrictions put on the fully, well, other four members of county council have all the same authority as the mayors in voting and holding positions and all that. Why they can't run for warden? Because to me, we're all elected. Just because you were appointed by other members of the council, all the people that appointed me were elected by the people of Central Province. The same with Jerry. This idea that we weren't elected by everybody holds no water with me. I want to put the caveat, I don't want the job. I've been there a couple of times. But I don't see why we would shut out 50% of the members of county council from holding the position of warden. I really don't, because you may be, you might be losing the best warden you ever
I was
had.
gonna say, you might have a better quality candidate than the mayor.
Well,
Yeah.
whether that's to be decided, but the point of the matter is to close the door on four members, 50% of your makeup of county council without having an opportunity to even, verbalize a desire to be warden. I'm not sure it's fair. So that's my opinion on that. Other people can express theirs also.
I don't want the job. I wouldn't want.
But that's not the issue in my mind. That's not the issue. We have to make a recommendation here on that line. Do we want to retain the fact that, or do we want to make a recommendation to county council that all members of council, whether appointed or whether mayor or secondary, have an opportunity to be mayor, to be warden? What's your feeling on that?
From my point of view, I think it's working very well the way it is. I would say that the mayor should be the here, the way it's going now.
Here,
I'm not sure I agree with that, because I think I've seen councilors who are probably better candidates than some of the mayors I've seen over the years. Might do a better job, might have better experience, more business experience. I think it should be merit driven, not just position driven. That's my opinion. By merit, you understand what I mean? By merit driven rather than the position driven.
just to throw a caveat out there, it is possible. One of the comments I heard in my interaction discussion the other day was that the appointed person probably doesn't have any experience on county council. You could have a scenario where you have 8 people here that has no experience on county council. 3 mayors, you could have 4 new appointed. And when I look at the average age of council, that may not be that far off. So what I'm saying is that my point is that are we missing an opportunity to have good quality warden or someone who may have all kinds of experience by not allowing them to be warden. It's
Well,
restrictive.
Bill, we have mayors right now that have never been on council in their life, and they run for the position of mayor and they get elected. They have absolutely no experience whatsoever. Whereas you could easily have some councilors who have been around for years and all kinds of experience, good quality people, but they never have the opportunity to be warden of the county. But we've got this mayor who just walked in off the street, who got elected because he's popular. I think it should be a merit rather than position.
To further discussion forward, because this I'm sure will be a discussion later on when it comes back to county. But my feeling, I don't want to put my thoughts on here only. My thoughts of this line should be basically eliminated, removed. And a statement to say that all members of county council are eligible to hold the office of warden and deputy.
But you realize that'll never pass with the current
Doesn't matter.
system.
It doesn't matter. What we will do is by making that change, is it will come forward for discussion. As a county, if we don't make any comments here, then the status quo is going to remain. Am I right?
But that's correct, but I'm just confused with comments. Am I removing section 5.3 or are we rewording this to make it note that all members of council are eligible to hold the office of warden and deputy warden?
That's what,
I think it'd be better to state it like that, because all members would be allowed.
all members of county council
Yeah, all.
are eligible to hold the office of warden and deputy warden.
You've corrected the problem way back with one person thinking that they should stay on for more than 1 year. You corrected that with 5.2, right? You have to have the election every year. You have to have one person can't get into the warden's position and just say, I'm staying here. Right?
I laugh only because I know history.
Oh, I know the history too. It was a miserable time. I mean, I'm hearing about it from the township point of view, but it was not a good period of time.
Am I missing it here, Jeanette? Am I missing something here, or is there a line that gives a term?
Sorry, that's section 5.1. The term of office of the warden and deputy warden shall be 1 year unless they are re-elected to remain in office.
Right.
Okay,
That solves that problem.
yeah, well, that's what led to the issue.
We used to
It was
listen to that
not,
person.
it was not in there. Right, so. And I'm sure that, 5.3 was having added after that.
So previously, section 5.1 actually said the term of office and warden was for the term of council.
Yeah.
And then there was a gentleman's agreement that the warden would just step down and then election would hold. Shouldn't say gentleman's agreement, should I? That's a very old term because there are also women on terms.
It makes sense if we ask the fellow members of the EOWC how they end up. Then a Lanark, for example, the deputies can be. Does that give you some information? I know there are some that can, some that can't.
I can certainly look around to see what the other EOWC ones are doing, but just off the top of my head, like for example, Leeson and Bremble, it's just the mayor because they're such large councils. It's just the mayor.
And alternate between a Leeds representative and a Granville representative. They are 2 years.
Okay. No, but sorry, I meant the members of, that sit on county council. Are we the only county council that has representation from two, that the townships have two members appointed? Like, are all the other ones just one? It's the mayor that comes?
No, Lanark has two.
There has two, okay. I can reach out to Mayor.
Why don't we just do a quick survey of the other, because it won't be Prince Edward County and Kawartha, because there's some that's here that don't have a ward. So the other,
Lennox and Addington will only have one.
they've got 4 townships, but 8 councilors.
Yeah, because once again, the small number of mayors and the magnitude of the amount of work, you need that extra other body to fill committee appointments. But say Renfrew County, they have what, about
18.
yes, because they're so geographically big. They are in actual fact the largest geographic county in Ontario. Okay. We're happy with that recommendation. This is, by the way, a recommendation. So is there anything else on that page that members want to point to that? Or Jeanette, you may want to have a comment on?
No comment. I have no comments on this section.
So we talked. Clerk has no comment.
That was the only thing that I noted on that page.
So, I mean, just to point some things out, so section 5.9, the election of warden shall be by secret ballot under the authority direction of clerk. So, the municipal, oh, sorry, I don't have my mic on.
The municipal act makes it discretionary that this is the only place where you can do a vote through secret ballot, but it's not mandatory. So we want that to continue if there's, for example, a tie. So currently, right now, we have a very, a council that really collaborates well together, that they know who's going to go into those positions. So there's really no competition. But if there were a competition, then you would vote for your choice of warden, and you do it right now by a secret ballot.
Right.
If you want it to remain a secret ballot. I'm just throwing these things out there. And then if there's a tie vote between 2 people, the names are thrown into a hat. And the winner is picked. Are you happy with that and how that works?
Just stop there for a minute, Jeanette, and maybe Kelly can kick in here all the same. If what's happening right today is going to continue, then what is the point of having all of these other cabinets?
So what's happened, well, you can't guarantee that what's happening today will continue. You have 4 mayors currently right now who work well together and who have come to this agreement at the beginning of the term of who will sit as warden and deputy warden during what years. But there's nothing in the bylaw. The municipal act requires that we hold that election every inaugural meeting in December, regardless of whether they pass a motion at the beginning of the term of council to say, here's who's going to be the warden and deputy warden for the term. It really is just it really is just an intent. It holds no authority because the municipal act requires that vote to occur every inaugural meeting in December. You may get a council where they're not working well together, and you may have 2 mayors who throw their name into the hat. So if it stays as just the mayors being able to run as warden, you may have 2 mayors that get nominated. You know, Councillor Martin may nominate Councillor Higgins, and Councillor Higgs may nominate Councillor Doyle. And then you have to vote. So the voting process is required, I think.
Does the mayor of South Frontenac get 2 votes for that?
No.
Only on matters of
Yeah.
business?
The mayor of South Frontenac only has 1 vote per mayor, and that's under the municipal act, that despite of any weighted voting.
Under 510.
There's certain places where you only get 1 vote, and this is one of them.
a point of clarification. If there was two mayors running, then who would get to vote for it?
So all of council votes. It's just only the mayors are eligible to be nominated for that position, but you all get a vote.
That to me seems something wrong with that. Because I'm allowed to vote for somebody, but I can't vote for presiding member. But that's just my opinion. That's really why I think that changed 5-3. We recommend. And then the rest of it falls into place much more. Makes your job harder too, by the way. Okay. Move on a little bit further.
Okay, so meetings of council. So here's where we're kind of recommending that this section be amended, so as follows. So for meetings of council, I wanted to sort of put out all meetings here. So under meetings of council, for example, 6.1 would be the inaugural meeting. And the inaugural meeting follows a little bit of a different process than the regular council meeting. So for 6.1, we would have the inaugural meeting, and then 6.2 would outline the order of business for the inaugural. So again, the inaugural meeting is a very ceremonial, meeting. There's no business actually held at that meeting, unless of course something is extremely time sensitive that we need to put it on the agenda, but typically it follows a different agenda. And the agenda is actually laid out for your council meetings in the procedural bylaws. So when we hold the inaugural meeting, it doesn't follow this. So we want to make sure that the inaugural meeting has its own agenda layout. So the order of business for the inaugural meeting, I've laid it out there. And that's typically what happens. So it's declaration of the office of councillors, which is required before you take your seats. Then we have election of the warden and the election of the deputy warden, then the declaration of office of the warden and deputy warden, then the dressing of the chain of office, then the warden's inaugural address, and then appointments to external boards and committees, and then the passages of bylaws. And then I put down there J as other ceremonial procedures as deemed relevant. And that's simply because during our inaugural meeting, we typically have welcomes from for example, our MPs and our MPPs, our mayor for the city of Kingston, who's one of our key partners. So I put that down there just in case they're not able to attend. I'd hate to have it actually put into the procedural bylaw in case you're not able to attend. So I've just put it as a general other ceremonial procedures as deemed relevant. So that would be the procedural bylaw, the inaugural meeting of council. And then your next meeting type would be your regular meetings of council. And again, as I noted earlier in the review, we've moved section 3 into this portion here. So section 3, which is locations and meeting times, etc., is now moving into this regular meeting of council. So it clarifies that your regular meeting of council, so they will take place on the third Wednesday of the month at 9:30, unless otherwise directed by council resolution. So again, that's another point that we might want to discuss. Then we're going to add a new section. Should a closed session be required? Because this isn't in the procedural bylaw right now. This is how we run our meetings. So if a closed session is required, council will begin at 9 o'clock and resolve the closed session, and regular meetings will commence at 9:30. So the reason that I have suggested in the past and why we have closed session first is because there are times when council will actually report out of closed session in open session. So you don't want the public to have to sort of wait around for an hour and a half while you're in closed session to hear what's coming out of the meeting. So that's why we've always had it at the beginning. So these two have been pulled from the existing 3.3, which I had spoken about. And then I've added here, we're gonna add a new section notwithstanding the provisions of sections 6.3, which is that the regular meetings start at 9:30. There shall be no regular council meeting in the month of August. So this was never put into the bylaw, or sorry, it may have been, but council has opted not to meet in August. The reason the August meeting was removed was because council falls on the third Wednesday of each month, and it always fell on the AMO conference.
Yep.
So it was always being canceled. So rather than continually passing a motion to cancel the August meeting, it was opted to just remove it. And that doesn't mean to say that if there's some business that council needs to address, that we can't do that through a special meeting. So that was just, that just clarifies that even though we're having regular meetings on the third Wednesday of the month, there's no meeting in August.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. I thought that the September agenda was huge because no business took place the whole month of August. Could we not have an alternate date in August or something like that? Because I really thought that your September agenda was really quite large.
So September is typically large, but keep in mind that that's also the time when we hold public meetings for the
True.
budget input. Now, I don't believe, we did have a lot of participants at this public
Yes.
meeting. So that's one of the things that makes that meeting large. And staff are well aware. So when we, as I mentioned earlier, the senior leadership team meets once a month to discuss the council agenda. And we do advise at that time for them to keep in mind that there is no meeting in August and to make sure that anything that you need addressed is done in the July meeting. And we also reflect back on what's gone in the previous year. So I can maybe just pick the CAO's brain a little bit here, but
Does that not put a lot of undue strain on staff to try to do an agenda like that?
so I'm just going to take a quick look at, because I know in the past that the council agendas have been large in September, but I'm not sure if it's because the meeting in August is missed.
Okay.
Or if it's simply because that's the meeting where we have the public meeting for budget input. I'm just
And
looking-
I think we postponed a couple of things till October too, just to spread out the workload.
Yeah, I-
It's not urgent.
I personally, I didn't see September as being,
I just thought it was a large agenda. I thought it was probably because of the duration of August.
do we have an opportunity here, Kelly, that if a meeting is required, it's always traditionally that the 1 month in the summertime was postponed because of holidays. A lot of counselors and staff and all the rest of it were taking vacation of some kind. Now, it's different this year because nobody's going anywhere because of COVID. But I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for us to use electronic meetings if necessary. If the agendas get big, maybe somebody should decide that maybe we better offload some of these by having a virtual meeting, a shorter virtual meeting. I don't know. Just throwing it out there.
So again, most municipalities hold 2 council meetings, right? So in previous places where I have been, so for example, in July and August, they opt to cancel one of them. So they hold 1 meeting a month. They don't actually stop them all together. And again, the issue, even when you go virtually, is that with that August meeting, it would always fall on AMO. So you had a majority of the councillors who simply were not available.
I follow that.
No, I just want to make a comment because this is huge agenda.
And maybe the simple answer for the September one is that we do public consultation at a completely separate time. And that's all we do with that meeting. Done that in the past too. It's just it's 7 o'clock on the Tuesday and like an hour and a half to listen to delegations. Receive the report, receive the delegations and refer them to your next month.
Whatever, it was just a comment. It's something I noticed.
And we haven't always had that many requests in the
Yeah.
past either. Yes, like it's usually 1 or 2.
Yeah.
You're right.
What, 4 or 5?
Well, the ones that were received this year were more so comments on the service level. So in the past, we typically received delegations from people who are actually asking for funding, such as the transportation services. The university hospitals came one year when they were doing their 10-year campaign again. We did have somebody from Central Frontenac come in terms of an arts project, which the Economic Development Talks continues to work on. And then there was a few others as well. So there typically been people who are asking for money as opposed to providing input into the budget. But keeping in mind as well that we now have our Engage Frontenac site, which we didn't have in the past. So it's another means for the public to provide input into the budget. But the budget does go in October, so anybody asking for money, we would want to make sure that the treasurer has enough heads up to mitigate, to show council what any of those asks could end up
Yeah,
costing.
I'm not sure it's a problem. I just want to make a comment, that's all.
All right, move on. The next-
And then for 6.1, 2, and 3, we were just recommending to remove those. So I mean, at the hour appointed when
Quorum is present, that's really irrelevant. Because you're calling the meeting to order at 9:30. So section 6.1, when we say that regular meetings of council will begin at 9:30, that pretty much covers that. Section 6.2, the clerk shall be in attendance at all times for meetings of council prior to properly constituted. That's a requirement under the municipal act, so I'm not too sure that putting it in the procedural bylaw is really required. But I would say that it's either the clerk or the deputy clerk.
There must be a recording clerk. Am I correct?
So there must be a recording clerk. The municipal act states that the clerk must record the minutes. So the municipal act states that I can delegate that to somebody for committees or boards and committees, but when it comes to a council meeting, it must be the clerk. But it can be the clerk or the deputy clerk. The deputy clerk holds the same power as the clerk. But I cannot say, for example, assign it to our recording secretary here, Angelique Cardinal. She could not just come in and record the minutes. It has to be the clerk or deputy clerk.
And to further, it cannot be electronic recording. In other words, you couldn't put a recorder in the room and just record all the things and then devise your minutes after the fact.
Well, I still would have to be present. The municipal act, and I can pull the section up if you'd like, but the municipal act requires that the clerk be present to take the minutes.
The point I was making, that let's say that there was only the three of us here discussing these issues. And you said, well, I have to leave, but I'm going to leave her. I'm going to leave a recorder here, tape recorder, and then I will make the minutes after the fact, listening to the discussion. That's the point I'm making. It can't be electronic recording.
that's what we've been asked for before, but let me just check the act.
It doesn't say, but I don't know how you perform, sorry. Like under duties of clerk, it says the municipal clerk, or the municipality shall appoint a clerk whose duty it is to record without note or comment, if required by any member present at a vote to record the name and time. Like, how do you do that if it's just a recording? To keep original copies, okay, to perform other duties required under this act. Yeah. I think practically it's impossible, but I don't think the act says you can't do it. I can't imagine how you do your job if you aren't. How would the clerk do a recorded vote? They weren't in attendance.
The chair, I assume that the chair would,
No, the act says that the clerk must do it.
Yes, I understand that, but if it was. Clerk wasn't here, and the recording going, I said, how do you vote, Mr. Council? Yea or nay? And that would be recorded. Anyway, it's not allowed, is what you're clarifying. So by removing 6.2, you're saying that's picked up somewhere else. You're saying that 6.2 is picked up somewhere else?
Well, the municipal act requires that us to be in attendance at the meetings, and I'm just going to,
There is a section under the municipal act that does require that at council meetings, it must be the clerk here.
So it's in the meeting section, not on the quick meeting section. Just kidding.
Sorry, I have in my notes here that we're going to address this under order of business. So under order of business, when we get to section 12. So the business of the council will be taken in the following order, and then we can include this here.
Section 12,
Yeah, so it'll end up going under order of business. We can more appropriately put it in there
okay,
than at the hour appointed.
yes, and there was going to be another addition to that also, right? That's the agenda order. With the table motion, the advance, or what you call
Yes.
it?
Well, sorry, when we get to that section, I have made my notes of what changes you wanted to see, so I will bring something forward for that under section
All right.
12. So then 6.6 would be the committee of the whole. So we've gone from inaugural council meeting, and I'm doing these in order of precedence. So we have inaugural council meeting, then the regular council meetings. The next precedence would be the committee of the whole. So we're just going to use the existing 6.4, which is addresses committee of the whole. However, we're going to remove the last sentence. If a separate meeting is required, committee of the whole meetings will be held on the first Wednesday of the month. Because sometimes we hold committee of the whole meetings other than the first Wednesday of the month, as we just had 2 committee of the whole meetings this Monday and Tuesday. So
Right.
that sort of limits us when there's a budget meetings, for
Right.
example, it puts a limit on us. So we're just going to remove that. If that would be okay with the group.
I have no problem with that.
Right.
But saying the committee of the whole meeting will be held on the first Wednesday of the month, but that's not when we hold the budget.
No, so that's why I'm saying we're gonna remove that sentence. So
Right.
we're gonna use the existing 6.4,
Right.
but we're going to remove that last sentence.
Right.
And then the next section would be, we're gonna move section 6 under meetings of council. So if we go under section 7, special meetings of council and emergency meetings of council, those are sections 7 and 8. We're gonna move that under section 6. So they're gonna go under meetings of council. So section 6 will be meetings of council. So it'll have, your inaugural, then it'll have regular meetings, then it'll have committee of the whole. We're gonna move special and emergency meetings, because right now they're in their own section, 7 and 8. So we're gonna move them into a section 6, so they'll get renumbered appropriately. So section 6.7 will be special meetings of council, and we're just going to use the existing 7.1. But we're gonna add by instructing the clerk to issue a notice of special meeting with at least 48 hours advance notice, because I don't believe that's in there right now. So if you look at special meetings of council, it says the warden may at any time summon a special meeting of council. The clerk shall, upon receipt of
of a petition of council can also order a special meeting. So you have two ways to get a special meeting. The warden can ask for it, or members of council, if they all
Yeah.
sign a petition, can ask for it.
Right. But
But
the
it's
majority-
missing, but section 7.1 is missing that when the warden summons a special meeting, that the clerk needs to add a notice of special meeting and give the councilors 48 hours notice. So that, it's just a minor technical glitch. It's included when members of council sign a petition, but it's not included when the board orders it. It's just a technical glitch, but it just, I hate to have, one warden that you get, a disruptive warden 1 year and says, I'm gonna call a special notice, but don't bother telling me what. It just,
Or
It's
just
just-
tell these people so you get
Yeah.
more.
Right.
so it's just a technical glitch, but it should be in there as well.
My wife was actually on the board of directors one time when it was huge amounts of money being moved. And the CAO of the organization called in here for the members and held a meeting before the meeting to see how the vote was going to go. And then when the vote came, predetermined, so.
So, and then the next one here is we're recommending that we just delete emergency meetings of council, because I really can't look at this and figure out what's the difference between a special meeting or an emergency meeting. It's a special meeting of council. Whether it's an emergency or it's not an emergency, it's a special meeting of council. So I just find this section a little bit redundant, because you can do the same thing under a special meeting of council. And again, it's the same thing. The emergency meeting, it says no business except dealing directly with the emergency can be had at that meeting. And the special meeting is the same, no business except for what's listed on the agenda.
And how do you control that discussion?
You mean to make sure they don't start discussing other things?
That's right.
So we put out the notice of meeting, and if they come off and start discussing other things, like they go to add something to the agenda, I would make note that, as per the procedural bylaw, you cannot do that.
But clerk, how do you stop? Is it the responsibility of the chair of the meeting or the warden or whatever to say we are here to discuss,
Emergency.
this emergency only and no other issue will be dealt with? But I mean, you put 8 county councilors in a room and you restrict their discussion.
You're talking politicians here, Bill.
So our role as staff is to advise. Whether you listen to our advice is, the call of council, but it would be, I would advise that, as per the procedural bylaw, if it's going to be discussed, I would like to think that the chair or the board would halt any such discussion, but if it continues on, again, our role is to advise. We cannot tell you what you can and cannot do. That's, we only advise. And if other items are discussed, you face the potential of a meeting investigation, because keep in mind that the ombudsman doesn't just investigate closed meetings, they can investigate a council if a member of the public states that you have not followed your procedure.
Right. And theoretically, Kelly, correct me if I'm wrong, is that before this meeting, I legitimately cannot pick up the phone and call Bruce and Al and have a discussion about what we're talking about today, can I?
You can't further the business of the corporation while there are a quorum present. So the integrity commissioners have actually ruled on serial phone calls leading to a result. So essentially what you're saying.
Yes.
But an individual discussion with Bruce is allowed, correct?
You don't have to.
Right, and I have it's not a case of reaching a decision, it's reaching a consensus of how we're going to vote. We're outside the environment of official meeting. And that's really what I'm saying, is that can be investigated. how you would investigate it.
So if you had a one-on-one phone call with Councillor Higgs, you're not disrupting the act, you're not contravening the act. If you then hang up and you have a one-on-one phone call with Councillor Martin, again, you're not disrupting the act. If you have a conference call with Councillor Martin, Councillor Higgs, and the quorum, so let's add the word into this, then it could be a closed meeting.
Right.
But keep in mind that when you pick up the phone and you do have these one-on-one conversations, that, you know, the intent of the act is to ensure that because you're accountable to the public, the intent of the act is so that the public gets to hear the discussion and the reasoning behind how council comes to these decisions. So, you know, it's totally a councillor's call, but just always remember in the back of your head that you were elected to represent the public, and am I doing that justice?
Okay. So,
So again, my thought here is just to eliminate the emergency meetings, because they really are just special meetings. So we're just adding a whole section to the bylaw that really is redundant.
well, it does appear to me that there is a duplication between 6 and 7.
Yeah, so I've sort of laid it out there. So basically what we would do is we would have a special meetings of council, and we would use the existing 7.1. But again, adding that additional instructions by the clerk to provide notice. And then for 6.8, we would combine the current 7.2 and 7.3 to read as follows.
Yeah.
So the clerk, upon receipt of a written petition of the majority of members, call a special meeting for the purpose and time mentioned in the petition. The clerk shall provide all members of at least 48 hours notice of the special meeting. So, and then we're just going to delete. So for 6.9, we would use the current 7.5. We would delete emergency meetings. And then for 6.10 joint council meetings, we would use the existing 7.8. So
Here's a question. here.
out of all that, sorry, go ahead.
Question is, do we have to have a regular council meeting to have a closed meeting? The reason I'm asking is because tomorrow we have a closed session and there's no other council meeting involved. It's a closed session because of a personnel problem.
So you start the meeting in open, go into closed.
So you do have to have the open session
Yes, sir.
before you go to closed.
And it has to be, all meetings have to be publicized, am I correct?
That's correct. So under the municipal act, and I can pull out the specific section for you, it clearly states that you cannot go in section 239 before going into closed session. You must pass a resolution in open session stating why you're going into closed and a general description of what you're going into closed for. So for example, with us, we go into closed, we quote the section 239, section A, a potential disposition of land. And then I put as it relates to, for example, property acquisition for the K&P Trail in North Frontenac.
So basically our discussion here is that we're eliminating a lot of 6 has to do mostly with closed sessions. And then we've got a section on special meetings. So basically what we're trying to do is combine the two to make it a little more modern or
Yes.
useful.
User friendly.
So at the end of all of this, when we're done with, so currently right now you have section 6, which is meetings of council. You have section 3, which is times and dates of the meetings of council. And you have section 7, which is special meetings, sections 8, which is emergency meetings.
Right.
And so basically that's all going to get lumped into a section 6. So section 6 is going to deal with all meetings of council. So it'll list the ad hoc, the inaugural meeting, then the regular meeting, then the special meetings, then the joint meetings of council. They'll all be in that one section 6.
Yeah. But we are going to leave section 9 in there for a second, because that's pretty important.
Well,
Declared
so they
emergency.
will be renumbered, but we haven't got to section 9 yet.
Right, no, that was my notes.
Yeah, so we haven't got there yet. And so the only last thing that I wanted to add, because we are getting past 11:30 now, is we're gonna add, although it's a meeting of council, I really feel it needs its own section, and that is a section on closed meetings. So the new section 7 will be closed meetings. So we would add a new section. Closed meetings. So we would add a new section. So 7.1, we're going to use the existing 6.7, which already addresses closed meetings. And this is basically going to lay out what your section is going to look for closed meetings. So it's going to say all closed meetings shall be held by the committee. All closed session meetings shall be held by committee of the whole council immediately preceding the regular council meeting at 9 o'clock. So that goes into your time and place, and closed is always in committee of the whole. So that identifies at 9 o'clock. In the event, and this is something that we don't have there now, because currently right now we are running late. And we had this happen at the September meeting where we had a number of people waiting for you to start your regular session at 9:30. So I'm just suggesting to put another item in here that says session agenda items are not completed in the allotted time prior to the regular meeting. The closed session may be recessed and resumed following the completion of the regular meeting business just prior to before you pass the bylaws, or by a certain time in the meeting through a resolution. So for example, I believe we've had this example in the past where there's been a closed session, where you've had a report in closed session, but you've also had a similar report in open session where the two sort of dealt with each other, but certain aspects of it didn't fall under the criteria of closed meeting. So we can have a closed meeting directly before that open session item. Without getting into too much detail, because we are in public right now, I'd hate to sort of divulge what that was, but there may be times when there's a meeting on the open agenda that you need to hear certain information before you make that decision, but that information that you need to hear, it falls under the criteria of confidential or closed session. So we may hold a closed session just before that.
Now, would that entail that we would have to pass a motion during that closed session, although I know you can't, to reconvene?
Yes, you would still pass the motion to reconvene. So that's basically for closed session. So it's going to get its own new title. It's going to specifically lay out that it starts at 9 o'clock. And it's going to specifically now lay out that if you don't finish by 9:30 or by 9:20, that you're going to recess that closed session, come into regular session, because again, we've given the public notice. And then after everything's finished, just before you pass the bylaws, you can go back into closed
Just
session.
going back to, they're postponed.
Well, as opposed to recently, what we've been doing is we've been making the public wait. And, you know, something else that we may want to consider and is to take out the time and put that the closed meeting shall precede the regular meeting. So for example, if there's only one item on the closed session that we know is only going to take 5 minutes, maybe we start the closed session at 9:15. Or if we know that the closed session has some pretty intense information on there, if council's agreeable to it, start the closed session at 8:30 if we know that there's going to be a hefty discussion. I mean, I'm not sure which the preferred option is.
Well, why not put a section in there that if conditions warrant or the agenda warrants that an extended closed session is necessary, that it be at the call of the warden to call either, it looks like we actually 15 minutes, and the meeting shall start at 8:45. But that notice goes out to all the members that the closed session is going to be extensive, but we need a little more time. But it could be at the call of the CAO and the warden to recognize that, hey, this is some in-depth discussion here. We'll need more time than what's allotted, and have the flexibility that it could start early, because I don't think you want to change the start of your regular council.
No, not the regular council. Sorry, what I was recommending was, so right now we have it, all closed session meetings shall be held by a committee of the whole immediately preceding the regular meeting starting at 9 AM. So we could just remove the starting at 9 AM.
So they could start at 7:30.
Yeah, but it would be essential that communications happen with the members. Right? And it would have to be consideration is that when is your regular starting time? When's your regular starting time? Is it 8 o'clock? What do you
I
normally?
regularly email about 5:30.
Right, because that disconnect is only in the evening, not in the morning. But the question becomes is, are we going to pay overtime to start early? I'm sure it's going to be the exception, not the rule.
Well, we don't, managers don't make overtime, so.
No, but there is,
We just.
your time is invaluable, also your personal time, but would it be onerous for to expect you to come in and be ready to go, because you're here a long time before we start, you know that. So if Kelly and whoever the warden has decided we better look at this and we're going to have a good hour's discussion around this. It won't be onerous for you to be ready to go at 8:30. Because the other factor is it going to be ready onerous for Jerry and Ron to get here at 8:30, especially in wintertime. Because it could be that, I leave home every day. When I come to here, I leave at 6:45, but that's on my own choice. Sometimes I get to talk to my grandkids at the bus stop. And I also think in terms of the railway, where I've sat in Kitchener for 20 minutes. So,
You need to get here by 8:30, I've got to leave at 7.
so putting something like that in, is that going to help proceed?
And there's also now, we have to think about the technology. So if we're going, what our experience has been now with, but the experience now that we've been having with the technology with Zoom and YouTube, it's really great when it's working well, but it also takes staff time to stop the meeting, going from open to close. So think that as well, now that we're live for the public, that there's a consideration of time it takes us to come back in here and get everything set up back to go into close and then back in again to open. So there's also that.
I think we're probably better off saying it starts at 9. But we could extend it by, and we'll generally know, is this going to be another 5 minutes? Okay, 9:35 probably is a big deal. If we've got the lawyer there and he needs to speak for another 45 minutes, and you've got 20 people waiting for a delegation.
Right.
But you got to pay the lawyer.
In those situations, Kelly, would it be better off for the corporation to then call a special meeting? So each of those points would have to be decided by either yourself or in conjunction with the warden that, hey, this is too big an issue to deal with in half an hour. And our lawyer said he's got a 45-minute presentation. So I think those have to be treated on their own.
So I'm just going to, give me 1 second here, because sometimes there could be a lot of reports on an agenda and there's no discussion. So, and I'm just going to see from our last one what actually happened. So there were 5 reports on the last one, which held it up and it was way past 9:30. So for example, when we know there's going to be 5 reports on a closed agenda. And likely it's maybe, like, do we want the flexibility to be able to say to council, you know, we're gonna call the closed at 8:45? Because we know you're gonna run a little bit late.
Not notwithstanding the issues that Angelique has pointed out.
Yeah, so basically with the issues that Angelique has pointed out, we really should be stopping that closed meeting by 9:20. So that it allows her staff to get in here and switch everything over for it to promptly start at 9:30.
Does the procedural bylaw allow us, does the procedural bylaw allow us to look at the situation where notification is given to all members of council that we have a heavy agenda for the closed meeting and that we are planning resumption of that closed session after our regular council?
I think that at that point, it would be up to the warden and clerk to say that these items probably are going to require us to report out, so should go first. But for example, when we're dealing with union negotiations, we're not going to report out, so it could go later. There's no, like, the chances of dealing with a discussion on negotiating strategy and having a motion come out of close pretty slim. So that could go later.
Right.
Whereas dealing with a property transaction where you're going to come out and in the council meeting, you're going to approve bylaw.
Yeah,
It needs to go
Yeah.
first.
yeah, I can see where you're coming from, because the discussion could go on, closed session, and actually make a decision, but it has to be fertilized in public.
Correct,
Right.
particularly where you're approving a bylaw or giving direction.
Right.
Approving a motion in open session, I think Jeanette said, oftentimes there'll be a portion in closed session and a portion in open session where the decision there influences that decision. Property acquisition, for example.
I wonder if some verbiage that could be put in the procedural bylaw where rather than changing the status quo, that we give ourselves the opportunity to be flexible in the fact that if something, if that exception comes along, that we have the flexibility to deal with it.
Yeah, that's a better solution.
Right.
So that could be done in what you've suggested previously. So we would have proceeding regular meetings starting at 9 a.m. unless otherwise determined by the warden and clerk.
What if we said that it must start at 9, that there's a maximum extension of 15 minutes? Like, people will understand 15 minutes, they won't understand now.
Yeah.
And there may be a session at the end where determined by the warden and clerk that there will be no reporting out.
So when you say maximum extension of 15 minutes, that would be starting at 8:45, not going from
Extension.
9 to
Extension
9:45.
to, no.
So we always start at 9. We could, if we're 7 minutes away from the end of the discussion, the warden could ask for a vote to extend it by 15 minutes. But there is no other opportunity, therefore everything else would have to go towards the end. And when we're setting up the agenda, if we're bringing in a lawyer to speak to us, and there is no potential for that, or a small potential for that to require reporting out, it could go at the end of the meeting.
So again, the only foreseeable concern would be that basically is what happened at our September meeting. But again, the regular council agenda clearly states that those meetings start at 9:30. So, and it's fine for council if it's just council to let it flow a little bit longer to 9:45, then it's, 9:45, 10 to 10 before we get the Zoom up. You've got public waiting.
Yeah.
So that's my only concern with extending it that 15 minutes. It's fine on maybe perhaps most given days, but we don't know that.
But we've had meetings that have gone a half an hour over. What I'm
Yeah.
saying is that you cap it at 15 minutes.
even with going beyond the stated time frame now, we should be passing a motion to extend that.
Yeah, we have,
No, we haven't been doing that, that I recall.
There's no cutoff in our procedural, there's nothing in our procedural bylaw that states the closed meeting has to finish at 9:30. There is in our procedural bylaw that regular council meetings end by 1 p.m. So there is provisions in there that a motion must be passed at 12:45 that we extend the meeting, but there's nothing in the procedural bylaw in terms of closed session because we've never really discussed this before, that it's been an issue. We've always just been in closed session and it keeps going later and later and later, and we've just let the public wait. So,
and for the most part, it's delegations that
Yeah.
I'm most worried about. So for example, Central Front Act puts their delegations at a specific time. So you run the meeting and you get to 5 o'clock, you hear your delegations, and you pick up the meeting after if you need to. So we could say delegations commence at 10 o'clock. And if you have a 15-minute maximum extension, that would give us 15 minutes to get through receiving the agenda, approving the agenda, and dealing with conflict of interest, reporting out from the closed session, and delegations always start at 10 o'clock.
That may be the answer, is to move the delegations away from the beginning of the meeting.
so again, and just, playing the devil's advocate here, I know that Central Front Act has done that, but I don't think there starts at a specific time, do they? There a specific
Oh,
area in the agenda,
No,
correct?
well,
Like they're item 6 or item 7, they're not.
yeah, they're just numbers.
Yeah, but there's
And-
nothing stopping us from saying delegations will always begin at 10 o'clock.
So if delegations always begin at 10 o'clock, let's just go the flip side of that, and you have no closed meeting that day. So your meeting starts directly at 9:30.
And you deal with agenda item number 1, and at 10 o'clock you flip over to delegations.
So are you recessing from, like, let's say, so looking at the agenda right now, before delegations, you have approval of the agenda, if there is one. Disclosure of pecuniary interest and adoption of minutes. Those things take about 3 minutes.
Okay.
So, and then you're right into delegations.
Yeah, and all you do is what Central Front Act did last night, is suspend the rules to allow the council to deal with business item number 1 prior to delegations. And at
It
10,
wouldn't be my
at 10,
preferred option.
at 10 o'clock, you stop for delegations.
So I'm just gonna say it wouldn't be my preferred option because it's technicality, but you have to, number one, you have to ask for a motion to suspend the rules of procedure. You have to indicate in that motion why you're suspending the rules. You have to have a 2/3 majority vote. And it wouldn't be my preferred option.
But it's the best option for delegations.
Or we always take a break during the meeting, it's usually what, 10:30 or something? Is there any option, any problem with having delegations later on in the agenda as an item?
So, and there's no way, you can certainly do it that way. There's no issue. The only, again, as I say, it wouldn't be my preferred option is because if you don't assign a time for delegations and you only assign them an area in the agenda, your agenda could go quickly or it could go very long. And you could have those delegations, for example, let's say delegations go just before the reports from the CAO. And then you have deputy briefings on there, and all of a sudden you've got 3 briefings or 4 briefings that meeting, similar to what we had last month, because they were briefings. They weren't listed as delegations, they were listed as briefings because they were asked to come to council and they have an area of expertise. So that could go on for an hour, and then you've got delegations waiting for their number to come up. So unless you assign a specific time as opposed to an area in the agenda, I think it's unfair to the public to make them sit around and wait.
And that's what I'm saying, assign specific time.
Yeah,
Maybe
but-
10 o'clock.
again, at 10 o'clock, and I'm just looking at the agenda at 10 o'clock. For the most part, if we were to look back at our closed sessions, for the most part, it might be once a year when you're going late. And for that once a year, we're now adding an extra layer of procedure in every single meeting to add a motion to waive the procedural bylaw to adopt allegations to speak earlier.
So I guess there's two options. You always end at 9:30. Or you make delegations a specific. If it's the interest of the general public that comes first, I don't see another option.
I would like to have a record if it's possible. We're not going to continue discussion too much longer today.
We'll need a motion to this.
The question becomes, how many times has this been an issue? And is it necessary to change anything?
Yeah.
So if we're,
As long as we allow for a closed session to happen outside of that half hour, where we don't anticipate reporting out to be required.
then if there's a big load comes along, we can deal with it.
Exactly.
But what your concern is that if in closed session, if we're making a decision on something that has to be backed up by a passing of a bylaw or something, we have to do that in regular council.
Right.
So if we come to that conclusion at the end of our regular council, then do we go back into session to pass that bylaw? Right?
So I'm just looking back here, I'm just gonna reflect back to 2020. So we had 2, 4, 6, 8 closed sessions. And the first one ended at 9:34. We have one that ended at 9:18. The other one ended at 9:22. Another one ended at 9:37. This one is. $9:22.
Basically once a year.
Yeah, like it's very rare that it happens. And I mean, we always have the option as well to be cognizant of when we know we have, a lot of people waiting to speak, that we know in closed session too, this new section will allow us to, in the event that we know it's going to be a long meeting, that we call it at 9:30 and then we resume just before reading of the bylaws.
Well, let's leave the status quo and deal with it as it becomes an issue.
Well, we've moved our closed sessions to the end of the council meetings now. And the reason we did that was, well, Kelly referred to, we've had lawyers come for property issues and things like that. And it just goes on and on. So we have just stopped having closed sessions. And it's the last item on our agenda, closed session. That's what we're doing. That was the reason for it. That way you're not sort of hamstrung by time commitments.
We have all our closed sessions. I've been sitting at council meetings a long time ago where I had to leave at 11 o'clock at night. I said, oh, there's one more thing I want to decide. That individual wanted a quick passage on it, so everybody's tired. Anyway, closed session.
So the last one on there is that we're just recommending rewording section 6.10, which outlines the closed meeting investigations. So we've put some new wording in there, keeping in mind that we no longer use our own closed meeting investigator. It reverts to the ombudsman.
Right.
So it's just some rewording it to where council is to receive ever report from the ombudsman reporting in his or her opinion that a meeting or part of the meeting have been closed to the public contrary to the provisions of the act. Council shall pass a resolution confirming how it intends to address the report. And that is a requirement under the act that you must, under section 239(2) there, you must pass a resolution on how you intend to address the report.
Okay,
And, sorry, that was it for me, so I didn't get into section, sorry, that was it for our comments. As I mentioned earlier, we sort of stopped at section 8 because section 9, I anticipate will be a very wholesome discussion in terms of our, not only our procedures in a declared emergency, but those electronic procedures now can carry on. So we just want to see how council would like to deal with that.
well, I think it's a good spot to stop, isn't it?
Very good stuff.
Well, Jeff, with the flexibility of electronic stuff, what are other places doing? Are they allowing members to go off on a trip somewhere and just get back to the meetings?
So I have reached out to my EOWC clerks group as well as my AMCTO zone executive group. Some have not put any criteria on it. Some have limited. So I will reach out again because again, things have changed in the last few months, but some have actually allowed just, a member to allow so many times when they can call in electronically. So for example, 3. Now I'm going to assume that when it talks about those 3 times that you call in, that will be just 3 times when you call in, because you just simply don't want to come in person. For example, if you're sick, you obviously can't come in, so you can Zoom in. That would not constitute one of the 3. But
No, I'm talking about a member that may be in Florida sort of thing in January.
so again, that's something that you want to think about is what criteria do you want to put around there? Do you want to let members of council just because it's too far to drive, they just, well, I'm going to Zoom in, or, because as it was mentioned in the last meeting, the discussion really is different when you're face to face. And you all know that because you opted to hold these meetings face to face. You specifically did not want to happen over Zoom because it's a totally different discussion. So you miss a lot of that discussion.
When the discussion's happening on Zoom, you don't know who's out of the angle of the camera. You don't know who's handling. There could be somebody else in the room handling the information. So anyway, let's go back to the agenda. We're getting there. Anything communications to be dealt with in this meeting?
No, there were no communications.
No other business. Next meeting is already set for November 24th. Correct?
The week after council.
Pardon?
Sorry, it's the fourth Wednesday of the month.
Yeah, that's November 24th.
November 24th, 9.
Okay. So. I have a motion. We will finish the agenda for today. Motion to move by Ruth, seconded by Terry. I thought it was a good discussion.
It was a really good discussion.
It's
and,
real learning
it's funny
experience.
Because those were quite simple sections of the bylaw. So what's
Oh,
gonna
no.
happen?
Now she's trying to scare us.
Yeah.
It's a learning experience. You know, it's from them.
Just fall back together and we can. As a.
Oh, you do have